It's unquestionable that the Epstein business was heavily influenced, let me put it that way, by Mossad.
And so that's somehow emblematic on these huge geopolitical issues.
Yes, I watched Mossad take over the Pentagon in 2002. The Pentagon was infiltrated by Mossad. They did not need any identification to get through the river entrance of the building. They went upstairs to Douglas Feith, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the third most powerful man in the Defense Department. Occasionally, they went to the second most powerful man, Paul Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and they had run of the Pentagon. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, said to my boss one time, "Hell, I don't run my building. Mossad does."
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Sunday, June 7th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. Well, interesting topic for today, seeing as how we've been discussing this for years now. So have a lot of people discussing the obvious nature of what is now being allowed to be discussed. And it's an interesting thing to see develop in front of us as we've been discussing it and as it's been notated and dissected. It's really a outside word for it, I guess, an experiment or an observation of like a collective self-delusion. And I think that's a huge part of what we're all dealing with in politics. I mean, whatever this all is today, it's two-party illusion. It's largely political, but there's plenty of other things that you see outside of that are still in this same kind of illusory. Bottom line is that there's a situation with Israel infiltrating this government that's now being discussed, being outlined, New York Times. And because the New York Times says it does not make it the reality, they're simply overviewing things that a lot of us, including, as you saw, Wilkerson or plenty of others in the past, who have said similar things. And not necessarily that it's all or nothing. You could ask that question, but that it's objective. It's obvious. You can prove it. It's happening in front of you. And the point being is that now that it's being pointed to for whatever reason, and we'll get into that a little bit, it's as if it's now, now we see it. And all the grifters and profiteers jump in and start acting like they were on it a long time ago, or that they're now seeing it and breaking it down and it's news story. All that's good to some degree, that people are actually, I guess, the average people are finding the information readily available. Let's put it that way, even though all of us has already been there this entire time. But back to the point of like the collective self-delusion, I think we deal with this in a lot of the things we see today, where there are things that are obvious, that some people just go, well, maybe I'm wrong, and that could be the case, and it's good to think that through. But as a collective, as a society, people, I guess the average people tend to sort of put it away until certain characters in the conversation sort of go, okay, it's been deemed allowed, it's been deemed acceptable. Right now, we can admit geoengineering is a real science. Now we can acknowledge that there's bioengineering of ticks and, or of insects and animals and any number of things we'll talk about. Possibly not today. And yet, why is that? Why did it take, whether it's a high-level mainstream media person, somebody in Congress or the government in general, why does it take that for someone to acknowledge the evidence that was already there? Now, there's two factors there. Is that because they're seeing it and going, well, I don't understand. I don't know if that's valid. Or is it they don't even realize that it's there or aren't able to find it if they look? I guess sort of three things, part B of the second thing. And I think those are very relevant, right? Because there's like a whole crowd of people out there who are really interested in this conversation, but just can't seem to find valid material. And I don't mean valid like only mainstream, but just aren't able to find the kind of content that we're putting out there, or plenty of other people doing the same excellent, objective, nonpartisan work. And then there's groups out there that see it, but for whatever reason, just kind of allow themselves to think that maybe they are wrong and they wait for the certain people. Now, I argue that's not the majority in today, but right now what we're seeing is that kind of dynamic falling apart, I would argue. But either way, whatever you read into that, a lot of that's my opinion. We are now seeing this conversation come to a head. And it's now being pushed back on by the very two entities being called out for it happening within, I guess. The idea that the U.S. and Israeli government are being exposed for having this sort of, I mean, there's a lot of ways to read into it. I think it's pretty clear from my perspective. And I think the evidence shows that Israel is manipulating the U.S. government in the ways we're discussing today. It goes both ways. But what's interesting is what's being shown is the influence Israel has over U.S. policy, what we've been talking about a long time. And you get responses from Israel, the United States, that go, that's fake news. That's not true. And then people point to them denying that as if that shows you it's not true, which is humorous, isn't it? And it's the ones fighting the deep state. Those are the ones that you need to listen to, the ones that are fighting the deep state by listening to the state. Makes a lot of sense. But we're going to go over that today. Honestly, I think what you guys probably already know about this topic is more than what you're going to hear in this article. But I'll go over some of the important parts of why it interconnects with the stories of today. I think it's very relevant, and it's not something that is one topic or foreign policy. I mean, as you know, and I'm not going to go into this too in depth today because it'll make this one topic too abstract, but I think this relates to a much larger conversation. And I think even Zionism and Israel itself are one part of this larger kind of thing that we're watching develop. And I as much as I do see it intertwining with a lot of it, but the problem or the important thing to recognize is this is one element of a much larger globalist sort of change that I see happening. Call it whatever you want. Like I keep showing people, these things are happening. It's not debatable. It's about the way I think it fits together, which is all these individual pieces that kind of fall into place, which I think is pretty clear, that create your new kind of global structure, the control grid that Catherine talks about. All these things are happening. Anyway, back to the main point today. We're going to go over why Israel's part in this is important and how obvious it is that it has infiltrated to whatever degree you think is acceptable, but obviously infiltrated U.S. policy to the point, if not controlling policy, that's being discussed. And then the big question at the end of it is, why now? Why would the New York Times or Donald Trump or anybody's administration or people, why would this now suddenly be something they go, okay, we can call it out? Some of them are not. Some of them are denying it. We'll get into that. It could be ultimately that this is so obvious they just can't, it's got to be pointed to so they can then put it somewhere else. Or maybe there's a breakdown in this country where you have people that are finally, the Charlie Kirk problem, as I put it before, are suddenly starting to see that, wait a minute, maybe there is a weird line down the middle of this fake MAGA movement. And that's the fake people on one side and the ones that actually care about America on the other. And the ones on the wrong side of that are the ones that aren't actually fighting for America. And you get people that have mixed into that crowd who suddenly start to see that line. And I think they suddenly start to fight for the America side of that. But anyway, we'll get into some of the deeper parts of why, I think, and talk about that. But we'll start with something that I wanted to share today. I actually put off two pretty in-depth, segments, but parts I was investigating around with stuff we've talked about a lot, the tick discussion, the mosquito discussion. It was kind of relevant today for the idea that of, these different topics that are being kind of thrust into the conversation that aren't new, sort of like the Israel thing in an interesting way. But I didn't feel like it was important to get it all today. So we might come back to that. And we will at some point in one of the next shows. But interesting to see how much that's been shoved by the usual suspects. And these are important topics. The idea of Google or Microsoft, or the idea of the ticks and Bill Gates and all this stuff that is wildly misrepresented by the Alex Jones of the world, but still important. Or the idea that, for example, Virally, that is the one involved with this new mosquito agenda that's not GMO, it's bacteria related, ties back to Donald Trump in first administration, as well as Oxitec, which is, and you get into all of this, and we'll go through it in a new show. The point, though, is that it all comes back to one kind of larger thing. And I think it's important to see that. And talking about the health side of this, I wanted to start with one thing that had to do with the medical system. And I'll get into some updates briefly, but I wanted to talk about the for-profit nature of it, which is not a secret, but it might just surprise people to see how, even with peer-reviewed science, it's pretty obvious that this system is driven by profit. And that may not be a surprise to some people, but if you have any industry driven by profit, well, there will inevitably be moments when profit is the focal point. And when you have to do with people's lives, you'll come to a point where the profit takes the day, as opposed to the worry about their outcome, their lives, their health. And a system based on your health, that seems a little bit counterintuitive. And we'll talk about that. And a few other points about free speech and some discussions about community notes and censorship that relates to the larger point we'll talk about today. But let's start with this in regard to the medical system. Now, before we get into this, those of you that know briefly, what I've been dealing with. My father was in the hospital. He is now out of the hospital, thank God. The problem, though, briefly to explain for those that haven't heard what we discussed before, he went in with something unknown. They still, to this very point, have yet to figure out what's actually wrong. I still find that baffling. Now, that happens, I guess, in some circumstances, but the fact that every choice they've made, or rather decision based on their expertise, if you will, has been wrong. What they thought was happening in the first place was wrong. What they thought was happening in the second place was also wrong. Not somewhat wrong, completely wrong. It wasn't pancreatitis. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't any of the things that they were letting guide their choices, two of which in the beginning were leaning towards other surgeries that didn't actually take place. Finally, they decided just to circumvent the blockage, which is what originally brought him into the hospital. So a bypass around something, and I'm not making this up, they still to this day don't know what actually caused the blockage. Now, a lot of the indicators are pointing towards something of an autoimmune or immune deficiency, CVID side of a thing, which is, the autoimmunity and you have the immune deficiency. So it's like the opposite scale of the two of the same sort of immune issue problem. And that was something even the doctors admitted to this day, no one's ever actually tested for any of that or actually tried to figure out whether or not that's actually the case, despite what we were asking for. Now, we got to the point to where he had the surgery and he was starting to do better. It was a little bit, there's a couple scary days in there, but now he's been consistently getting better. And now we're hoping getting him home. And so what we're worried about now is whatever the problem was, whether or not that continues to be a problem and whether or not that's then connected with the thing he's still dealing with. Now, I brought that up for a reason before we get into this medical part, because, during the COVID-19 discussion, there was very clearly an overreaction, just like there was an underreaction, right? There are people that suddenly argued like washing your hands was irrational. And that's very incorrect, by the way. And that's, this is to me just like basic sanitation. And of course, I'm questioning everything, but I think it's obvious to see that people started to react in ways that said like science was bad. And that's, question it all. Not all good, all bad, but question it all, right? And so you can see that on either side of it. And so in this kind of conversation, I just lost my thread there. What was I going to say? The overreaction was I can't believe I just lost that. Anyway, the point I was getting to with him in the hospital and the treatment was that now he's out, and ultimately we're that worried about this continuing to get worse and then having it come back around. And I guess, yeah, well, anyway, my worry there was a point I was making, and I'll just leave, but worrying that ultimately when he comes back around or something that ultimately may end up happening in the future, that it won't be related back to what he was originally dealing with. And I think that's concerning, right? Because that's what it was. That ultimately we need to be sure that we acknowledge that there is, some facility here. There is something that actually functions. You want to go in and get stitches in your arm, they're probably going to do a good job, or, question everything. But this kind of case too, they did the bypass and it worked. In effect, right? It did work. He's not hurting right now. It's getting better. He's able to go home, or he has gone home, and he's able to get and improve. But he still has his issues. And my point I'm making here is that if suddenly a week from now, a month from now, he got worse again, and it was the same problem hypothetically, that wouldn't be a success. Even though they successfully did this bypass and it ultimately got him out of the hospital, if the problem that they never solved still ended up hurting him or killing him, then that was never a success. It was simply a bypass of the problem that actually led to a bigger problem. And the reason I'm explaining all that is because it's important to acknowledge that there was a success, and I shouldn't even put it in quotes, but in the sense of what it did, the bypass worked. So they were successful in doing that. But had they tried to figure out the problem, it might have not needed to happen in the first place. And I could still be wrong. Maybe they succeeded and he's good. And that's why I'm trying to say this, is that ultimately we should acknowledge that there are things that can succeed. But it's important to see that there's a bigger problem that I think Western medicine avoids. Now, whether that's COVID-19 related stuff, and I really do think that. I think that there's a level of autoimmune issues, of like myocarditis related issues, where the hospital, the medical system is sort of averse to it now. They just choose to sort of resist those things. So when it comes to choosing between two directions, well, they lean towards the direction that doesn't go towards something that's seen by the rest of their colleagues as somewhat conspiratorial or whatever it is. And I've dealt with this myself, and I know you guys have as well. It's not everybody. There's plenty of good people still out there. As this leads into what we're going to talk about, I think it's quite obvious the medical system today is driven by something other than what works best for the patient. That's a factor for some. And again, in a real moment, if there's anybody out there who's like resistant to the idea that there's a doctor, let's say, out there who would choose to do something that would hurt you for their benefit, and you don't believe that, I don't know what world you think you live in. I'm not going to say that I know what percentage that might be. I'd like to believe it's a small percentage. But realize that that exists. There are people out there that don't care, that would put on that white coat and then completely sell you out for their own benefit, even let you die. It happened during COVID-19. I really don't want to believe that's the majority, but it's things we have to consider. There is a darker part of human nature out there. Now, when you add a profit motive to something like this, that makes that a lot easier for people to rationalize. And so that's what I'm worried about where this goes. Now, the reason I brought up my father's part was kind of a combination of making sure you guys know that he's out of the hospital, thank God, and he's hopefully getting better. And we're going to continue to try to find out what actually went wrong, keep track on some of the different things he's dealing with. Some of the things are indicating some kind of a weird, bodily issue that is around what he was dealing with. And we're just hoping that it's better. Not knowing the problem sure as hell makes that hard to diagnose. None of the doctors seem interested in even continuing to try to look now that they've got the surgery done. And so the for-profit side of this, I think, is a huge part of this. And I don't know how many people actually recognize this. Now, this is from 2008. Do financial incentives linked to ownership of specialty hospitals affect physicians' practice patterns? Some of them are somewhat specific, but many of them are just broadly pointing out that it does. That the reality that the profit-driven side of it very much does. And I don't think this is a hard sell for most of you. Physicians' ownership of specialty hospitals. Now, this is specifically when you overlap the way that our system works today, where instead of having practices in general hospitals, you more so have things that get shoved into specialities and that wildly increase prices, especially if you read this study. Physician ownership of specialty hospitals altered the frequency of the use for an array of procedures rendered to patients treated at those hospitals. Given the growth of physician-owned specialty hospitals, these findings suggest that healthcare expenditures will be substantially greater for patients treated at these institutions relative to persons who obtain care from non-self-referred providers. Now, that may even make sense. I don't agree with the idea that, basically, I guess the simple point of this is that you have places where their specialty, they can charge more. And of course, they can find reasons and justify why that needs to be increased. You could argue they find more because they're experts. But the more you go through this, you start to realize there's a correlation here. This one entitled, I should have had that up top. Do physicians' financial incentives affect medical treatment and patient health? I'm sure you already know where the answer is going. And these aren't like cherry picked. You're going to find tons of these. I just wanted to find the ones that were, like the high level, well done, peer reviewed type studies. The conclusion simply says this paper finds that financial incentives significantly influence physicians' supply of health care. We estimate that a 2% increase in reimbursement rates across the board leads to a 3% increase in care. And the simple statement, physicians disproportionately adjust their provision of relatively intensive and elective treatments as reimbursements rise, as they appear to invest in new technologies in order to do so. Leaning into technologies that increase their revenue. Well, of course, from a business, why wouldn't they? But you see how these things become contradictory when you're talking about health and treatment and what's best for the patient versus what's best for their outcome. And on top of that, that you end up in a position where as the reimbursements rise, the more they might make from them, so too do the treatments increase. How do you make sense of that without the obvious profit motive? Now, you have to understand, this isn't everybody. There's plenty of doctors out there. I know some of them in my life from people that I know that, they're I'm sure throughout all that we went through, plenty of you know them. There are good people out there who fight through this broken system and will tell you the things that ask your opinions. And many of them have gravitated away from the mainstream system for these very reasons. And it's only getting harder to find, but they are out there. This one is entitled Association Between Reimbursement Incentives and Physician Practice in Oncology, Cancer, which you all know is the worst out of this topic. Specifically speaking, when it comes to the pharmaceutical side of it, when it comes to oncology and cancer, there's a direct profit motive from the administration and the prescription of these pharmaceutical pills. And the well, there's multiple parts of it, not just pills, but the cancer treatment industry. It is an industry and it's easy to look up. It's one of the only pharmaceuticals that actually gets a direct cut of the profit to the doctors. Why? Well, I think it's obvious, guys. And especially since it has like a 3% overall success rate when it comes to all combined treatments. Why would that be something you push? Well, I think we're answering that. Findings, 18 studies were included. It's a pretty large one. All were observational cohort studies and most had a moderate risk of bias, which most do, but so you can hear that. Most studies, 15 of 18, 83%. Reported an association between reimbursement and care delivery consistent with physician responsiveness to financial incentives. Findings consistently suggested that self-referral arrangements may increase use of radiotherapy and the profitability of systemic anti-cancer agents may affect physicians' choice of drug. Really easy to understand. These findings suggest that some oncologists may, in certain circumstances, alter treatment recommendations based on personal revenue considerations. It's a very nice way to say that. Very flowery, but it is exactly what it sounds like. They'll choose to do something that makes them money, even though it's not the, well, I would add, even though it's not the best choice. But simply put, you can have two choices, one of which, that this is what I always try to put it for somebody who doesn't want to see this as the worst in people. You can have a good person who genuinely thinks they're making all the right choices, and you come down to it where you have two options. And really, let's just put it like this. Let's say, medically speaking, it's a wash. Either one would work. But you got one that you make twice as much money. What do you think they're going to choose? Why would, morally speaking, why wouldn't they? Well, this is the one that, you may go, well, that one even has extra things and it's probably better for them. Whatever they do, ultimately, they will lean into the one that probably makes them more money. Not everybody, but most. That's what I think. I think we can see that today. And so but then of course you add to that the people who are not morally driven, and they will do this every day of the week. And I think that's the system we've created. Now, of course, then you add to it the conversation of what happened during COVID-19. I think this is wildly relevant. You have a situation, and this isn't just hospitals, guys. This was police. This was firemen. I mean, a lot of different positions where you had people that had integrity. Even if you think they were wrong, even if they were wrong, they believed they were right. And let's be honest, they were correct in their both moral, constitutional, and I argue health standpoint. And they didn't want to take that shot. And they stood by their principles, and they got pushed out for it. Many of them never came back in all of it. Military. I mean, so basically what they did was push out people who would stand up for what they believed in. And what you were left with a bunch of lackey following, power hungry nurses, doctors, firemen, police, whatever else. And I think we've seen that dramatic change in this country just from that, and a lot of things. But from the enforcement arm, are we not recognizing a difference on this like aggressive authoritarian edge? Yes, what some of Trump's policies have led to that, but you think it's just that? If it was the same entire circumstance, I argue there'd have been more pushback. But here we are. So here is another article. This one is pretty well done. It's an article actually discussing a couple different studies and published in 2021. The case against free fee-for-service healthcare. Now, this like for-profit medicine, right? Now, look, I'm not against some people. Like if you have a practice and you want to make money by your practice and not just dole out your services for some community service or some free, that's up to you. The problem is not people wanting to profit from their services. It's the system that drives them to lead to, basically that a profit motive becomes the only way you can survive. And that's because with there's a whole different conversation when it comes to insurance companies and the broken nature of how these prices have wildly inflated so they can all make their money. But don't worry, you have insurance. It's zero, but not for everybody. And it becomes this weird system where you either then have to be in the insurance system, which then also rises incredibly, or you can't afford it in the first place. And they're all stuff in their pockets. So aside from that, the point is, well, I guess the real thing I said there was ultimately we're not talking about not wanting to profit from your services, but rather the system that drives even honest people who might want to make a profit into needing to break, what's the analogy? We're just basically screw you over to make sure they can survive. In this case, it's about the idea of how that has led to the larger problem. But I think it's important to see this as there's a middle ground, right? Oh, I think here it is. So there's three different problems it outlines. Problem one, substandard care for patients. This is the structure of fee for service has created incentives that are completely backwards. The lack of accountability in the fee for service system allows doctors, hospitals, insurance companies, and pharmaceutical companies to point the finger at one another when things go wrong. Don't we all know that? The result? Fee for service hurts patients and drives up costs. Now, what I'm reading on this is simply the profit motives forward nature of the system. Due to fee for service, some patients get too much care. Not that they even need it, right? Some do not get enough and others get the wrong care. Each of these three outcomes are explored below. Now, first, some patients get too much. Physicians report that 20% of medical care is unnecessary. Just think about that again. In this system we live in today, physicians report that 20%. And this is 2021. God only knows. I mean, good luck trying to factor in all of the stuff we know about COVID-19. Nobody ever will. So with these kind of things, like you could almost double in my mind. And that's just an opinion. But when we get to the point about the leading cause of death in this country, I guarantee you we're talking about way higher than what we said medical treatment was in this country due to just what happened during COVID-19. But ventilators and so on. They don't mark down, mind you, that even though those things provably, even peer-reviewed science showed, killed people. But just physicians report 20% of care is simply unnecessary. 1/5. That's insane to me, including 22% of prescribed medication. Surprise, surprise. 25% of tests that you're given and 11% of procedures. Now, these are unnecessary, not just like, well, maybe we'll find something out. Completely unnecessary. This is also called over-treatment and over-testing. That should not be surprised under the current incentives. When a medical resource is available and profitable, a hospital or doctor is more likely to use that resource. For example, again, if you please check the source material. This is actually well done. Like they cite this one, for example, is a Dartmouth Atlas Project study. So it's not some like random thing. This is like an academic study from Dartmouth found that in regions with more hospital beds, this won't surprise anybody, patients are more likely to be admitted to the hospital. Now, somebody who wants to lean into their favor is going to go, well, maybe because they just thought why not let them, but what you're doing is putting people in positions that don't need it because it's available. Now, like in a system where, you could rationalize it all day. I think it leans in the same direction where ultimately, even if with a good intention, it leads to the system doing that for the system. And then they kind of mask it with some altruism, right? Similarly, in regions with more intensive care units, ICU beds, more patients will be cared for in ICU. Well, now that you can't explain. Like the idea being you don't just magically have more people who need intensive care. They just find justifications for that being the case. And more specialty doctors means patients have more specialty visits and cost more. Second, some patients do not receive enough care. Simply, it says it's a huge problem. Underuse is 4 times more common than overuse. Now, to my mind, that's simply just that people who don't have insurance, the reasons is that they don't want to give them, like if let's say you rather have limited insurance is a better example, that you're not going to overtreat them because, well, you're not going to get reimbursed for that or you're not going to get enough. And so it's the system driving itself, no matter which way you look at it. It says when doctors are not accountable for or paid for the health of their patients, they do little to get them preventative care. Now, that's not what we're supposed to believe the Hippocratic Oath is about, right? It's about doing what's right. But that's not what the system is guided by. It's the same thing we're dealing with in this country all over the place. A government that screams about altruism and liberty and freedom and democracy and civil rights and then does none of that. They just yell it out loud and go do whatever they want. It's the same thing here. We're number one while we kill people more than ever with the number one thing. We'll get to that in a second. They do not get them preventative care. In other words, treating sick patients is more profitable than keeping patients healthy, which we all know in this country, it's a common sentiment, the sick care system. Excuse me. Third, some patients get the wrong care. In a single year, 25% to up to 42%, almost half of Medicare patients will receive a low value or useless test or treatment. Now, test makes that a little bit slight because, or a little bit, you could talk about some kind of a small blood test, but a treatment, this is what I'm talking about, right? When you're in a situation where the treatment's available and it might solve the problem, especially when you don't know what the problem is. Well, maybe if the family goes, well, that's he's about to die, we need to do that, you could make sense of that. But in a situation where you don't know what it is and somebody is stable, that seems to be an abuse of the situation. Instead of trying to take the time where they're stable to find out what's actually wrong and then seek out something that's not expensive and not invasive, like, steroids to treat an autoimmune issue, right? There's a lot of, now I'm not, again, speaking to my personal experience, pretending like I know. Not once did any of us from my family side of it pretend like we knew, because we're not like that. We're objective. We have ideas and we want to talk, we want to discuss these things, and we are happy to acknowledge that people in these positions do have an education that we do not in many circumstances. But at the end of the day, guys, it's always the point. It's your choice. COVID changed that for a lot of people. Even though we still argue this, and it is legally the case, it's not the reality for a lot of these doctors that you decide. Your life, your body, your decision, your family. Now, in this case, there was a little different part for us because my dad, my late grandfather was a doctor. And so he has some reverence there. In some cases, it's justified. And he was more willing to go with what they had to say. But so there's cases, though, where you have people, and I've talked about this, whether it's chemotherapy, any number of things, where they're in the hospital and the doctors go, well, this is what we argue. And they go, well, I don't want to do that. There's been cases I've proven to you in this country where people were forced, literally children taken from their parents and forced to be given chemotherapy. Why would that be happening anywhere in this country? That's medical tyranny. I've talked a lot about that. It just came to a peak in COVID-19. But this is what we're dealing with, guys. And so there's a whole range of this stuff, and it's only getting worse day by day because the system is getting more and more tyrannical. Now, we took a little bit of a dip post-COVID-19, but you have to realize these things did not go away, guys. The system is the same. They're just less forceful. If that switch gets turned back on, if there's new hype about some concern, it will be right back there. I don't know if anybody thinks that somehow it'll be different with Trump. You're really not paying attention. It goes, that means millions of people are receiving drugs they do not need. We just talked about the addiction of the masses conversation and all the antipsychotics and antidepressants and all sorts of horrible things they're given to kids 0, 1, 2, 3 years old. It's easy to look up. It's insane. They do not need them. Operations that are not beneficial, and scans and tests that do nothing to fix the problem. Misuse kills patients. More than 250,000 people die each year in the United States from medical errors, making it the third leading cause of death before the pandemic, according to Johns Hopkins research. Now, that's very disputed. That's a point that people have been pushing back on, I believe, since 2016 when that came out. In fact, it goes back to Marty McCary, interestingly enough. He's connected to it back when it first came out, I believe in 2016, and now was in Trump's administration. But it says, making it the third leading cause of death before the pandemic, according to Johns Hopkins, before what happened in COVID-19, meaning medical error, medical treatment in the number one system in the world, at least at that point, was the third leading cause of death in this country. Misuse cost the health system between $73 and $98 billion a year. Insane. Now, there's more in here you can read, but so I think those are important points to understand, especially the idea that we're in this kind of hubris-driven mindset that as Trump every day is talking about how everything in America is number one. You can't have a medical system that's the best in the world that also kills, that is the leading, if not one of the leading causes of death. That's just dumb, guys. It's not the reality. There's no kind of like per capita game. There's not some kind of manipulation of stats. That's just insane. And it shows you that the reality is we're not in number one medical system in the world. Johns Hopkins study suggests medical errors are third leading cause of death. There's Marty McCary. This is 2016. Here's the actual study breakdown. You can read this for yourself. This also Johns Hopkins study suggests medical errors now third leading cause of death in the United States. Here's the British Medical Journal actual link to it. Medical error, third leading cause of death, 2016. Of course, again, you look into this, you get a lot of really aggressive pushback. Now, here's what they have today. Leading cause of death. Now, the argument was, I think it was somewhere between, depending on who you ask, 200,000 to 400,000, the amount of deaths caused by that. Now, medical error or medical treatment. Now, I think when you combine all those things and you look at what happened during COVID, I don't think there's even a debate here. But you have to understand that this is where we are. Accidents are the third, and that's at 197,000. Cancer, 619,000. So, I mean, if you look at how many people died during COVID-19 in this country, and we know what we're talking about there, and it's not, not to get into all of it today, but the reality of what many of those things were called when they were really just reactions to things they were given, or any number of overlaps, or even just the ideas of the ventilators and different treatments they gave people that we know and can prove, peer-reviewed science and otherwise, killed people. Doctors spoke up. Spoke up during that and said, this is not what we're treating. They're being killed. That puts it somewhere in there. I argue this has to be number one at this point, my opinion, based on the numbers from COVID-19. But no matter what, guys, you can see that the numbers are within this range. A leading cause of death in this country is the treatment from the leading medical system in the world. So we're told. That's really crazy to me. Now, adding another aspect that I think is important. This is 2023. This is also Johns Hopkins. Report highlights public health impact of serious harms from diagnostic errors. So this is an additional part of this, you understand? Not just, and see, I argue this is all part of the same medical error treatment category. But if you carve it out into one, that may be how this is looking less than it is. And that's even as it's number 3 on their list, which is about them diagnosing people incorrectly. Now, I argue that's just in the same category, isn't it? So check this out. The original research article is published in July 17th, also by the British Medical Journal. Results of the new analysis of national data found that across all clinical settings, including hospital and clinic-based care, an estimate of 795,000 Americans die or are prematurely disabled by diagnostic error each year, confirming the pressing nature of the public health problem. Now, of course, that's a little different because you're talking about something that's not necessarily driven by a profit motive. I mean, I'm sure you could find a connection in there, but you could just argue incompetence, which I argue is probably a byproduct of exactly what we're talking about. But either way, it's still the system. So separate points, but the idea is we're talking about now over 1 million. Now let's just even half that. We're talking about permanently disabled or die. You can even take a quarter of that, and it still puts you well over the number that is at the top of those list of the one we just showed you, from even cancer or above, heart disease. And of course, you could take a step back, as I'm sure many of you were thinking when I was saying this, and look at what number one is and recognize how obviously that number has exploded because of the COVID shots and because of what we're talking about, which is the myocarditis and heart, thrombosis and all the different things that are connected to heart disease and vascular issues. And that's there too. But, and these are things that are never going to not be relevant, guys. It's important for us to continue to talk about this. But as always, it's important, I think, to not do their job for them. So as there's more different things popping up, for example, there are still, I've made this point very clearly. They're still working on mRNA shots. It just seems that nobody cares about that. Whether it's COVID-19, which they're still making, or hantavirus shots, or some kind of weird shot, those things are all being proposed through the Donald Trump RFK Jr. administration. And it shouldn't surprise anybody because they're not different than the others. At the end of the day, they have a different narrative. But I think that's important. But unless those things are being forced on people, unless there's some other part that makes it seem relevant to me, personally, I'm going to focus on other larger things because that's not a breaking news story to me. I think we all know that. But my point would be about whether it's being forced, whether this is being, there's lockdowns, just being hyping about, for example, the hantavirus cruise ship discussion, right? Now see where we are. I think that they're testing the waters with these things to see how much we will bite off. And you get the usual new media manipulators out there that are screaming about whatever they point to. One of the things I was going to point out about the ticks and the mosquito points, that's what's driving that very clearly. But on the last point, before we talk about the infiltration and Iran, this is a really important sort of a psychological censorship, free speech fraud discussion. And that's what Elon Musk and Twitter have been from the very beginning. And I think most people actually see that by now. But this is weird. This is Orwellian, like textbook Orwellian conversation. He says, June 5th, users who interact with a misleading post. That's quite a chasm right there, for the type of people we're talking about here, like Elon Musk himself, who constantly shares misinformation. He says anybody who interacts with a misleading post, and interacts, I guess, means she likes, engages. Who knows if they mean just looks at it? They look at that too, by the way. They've admitted that. Even starting to type a comment, they're already reading what you're putting on there. They've admitted that, even if you delete it. It says users who interact with a misleading post that is subsequently corrected by community notes. Not to get into whether it's corrected back, like we see all the time, right? Who knows? That's false, then it goes away. Or it's false, then it's a new, different kind of false. Later, it's the point community notes is manipulated all the time. But it says anybody who interacts with one that's misleading and that's corrected by them will receive a Twitter chat message. So they're going to text you directly on Twitter. They're going to send you a direct message that says, hey, you commented on you interacted with that and it's false. Now you need to send a correction. They will send you a chat message to correct any misconception. Now, of course, you can argue they just mean, hey, look, that's wrong. So you know that. I think we already know what they've been telling you. This is going to be subtle, to alter posts. Now, here's what's interesting to me. Not only is that very alarming based on everything we've talked about, like whether it's Elon Musk or not, that's Orwellian by, textbook definition. Can you only imagine the outrage if this were placed when Jack was in control, in quotes? I mean, think about it for a second. Anything under Biden's administration, or, showing you the hypocrisy of the partisan game, this would be a big deal. It should be a big deal regardless. You're talking about a platform who is basically trying to social engineer the ideas. Now, we're talking about a community notes. I've shown you countless examples where those were wrong. I've shown you countless examples where something is wrong and there's no community note. So as people rightly point out, first, Samar goes, even yours? Exactly. Seeing as how he's gotten things wrong consistently on this platform. And I guarantee that's not going to be a factor. I've seen him get them removed from his own posts. Or the simple idea that John says, this is great in theory. I disagree. He says, but since community notes are often dictated more by popularity than truth, exactly, won't this make it even more impossible for unpopular truth to gain traction? Yeah, bingo. Now you're starting to catch on. That's the point, guys, because now you can use the community notes idea as if that is the reality of truth to dictate whether or not we put the final point on something that says it's false or not. Who cares if it's actually true or not? It's about the control of the narrative. But what he's saying there, if you don't understand, is that these things are clearly influenced by the most people saying one thing or not. That's not truth. So bots, which we know are completely overwhelmed by them in regard to the platform. And, you could look at the US side of it. You could look at Israel's side of it. They do this for a living, guys. They have like whole entire warehouses full of not people anymore, but like servers that are literally pretending to be people on these platforms. This is a verified fact. It's not even a secret. So understanding that they can just muscle something into being one or the other, this is an easy way to hide things. That's exactly this. There's no way that's going to be accurate. Now, before we get into this, or a couple of the points, I want to make sure you see some of these examples. Now, we're going to touch on this probably the next show. I'm thinking, and we're going to do a show tomorrow. And I wanted just to go over some of these, but it's going to take a long time because maybe not a long time, but more time than I want to take today. But this is going around. Okay, you've seen this probably everybody, because it's what happens every time. Something like this becomes viral, and it's like literally everybody everywhere seems to have seen that tweet. That's weird when you think about it, guys, because of how many people are involved here. Now, this is a tweet that went around. This is from today, I believe, or was it? Today. Because I was just saying ticks and mosquito. I mean, these are important things to a degree. There's points of them that are important, but the idea, for example, of Jones and the rest saying that this is first of all, the tick boxes and them falling out of the skies. I've never been able to confirm that. I would never deny that because I've pointed to plenty of examples like the edible vaccines they drop for wolves and whatever else. But I've tried and never been able to actually confirm that. I think that matters. So as always, to be objective and important to tell you that these are things that are being stated that I don't think they've confirmed either. But on top of that this suddenly started to become a very huge topic, and you got people like Jones and the rest that jumped back in and started selling you on this idea about the secret plan to give you alpha-gal and stop the meat. And okay, these are things we've discussed as abstract ideas that I do think are important. The idea of how that could be. There's literally nothing that that proves or even shows you evidence that somebody's actually doing what he's making the claim. That somehow this is about weaponizing the ticks to do that so he can roll out his fake meat. Does that line up in a possible way? Yes, of course it does. In a hypothetical possible. It's logical that would work that way. There's no study, there's no statement there, but that's how they frame it. As Gates admits he's doing so-and-so, and people fall for it. And then I come out and go, but that's not accurate. What, are you denying that they're weaponizing tick? No, it's not what I said. But this is how infuriating it gets to people that want to believe, who understand how dark these things are today, and then will fall for the Joneses of the world, who feed them what they want to hear without facts and backing it up. Now, here's an example that was spinning around everywhere. Hope you guys can see this, but it's all ticks was a video that went out, and I'm not sure exactly where the original post is from, claiming it's from Nebraska in this tractor. Now, what's interesting about it is if you look, there's two things to easily note for people that are around ticks. In Tennessee, they're pretty frequent. One, they don't move that fast. Two, they don't fly. And you can easily see them flying around on this, you could at least argue objectively that maybe there are ticks and then there's other things flying around the cage. But if you look closely, you can see that there are things flying and landing on the actual window. You can see them right there, right in the video. Now, a lot of people beneath have said the same thing. The ticks don't move that fast. That's not how they work. But it's certainly possible because we can be objective. But then, of course, this is what came out, and it says ticks are wingless. They can't fly, and so on. But here's the point I want to make. This is the only reason I even brought this up today. After going back, now it got, of course, I should have taken a picture and left it there. It got added back. It was gone. It was gone right before I started this. Either way, I can still make the point. It just got removed. I laughed about that. I'm thinking, how perfect is that? Right. Somebody in the chat, I think they're probably either ladybugs or Japanese beetles, which are basically the same thing. And it's very common. That's exactly what it would look like. But anyway, I'm not going to guess. It was saying that it's not real, that it's not ticks. And then it got removed. Well, let's see what it says real quick. Oh, the same thing. Oh, but see, now it says still gathering ratings. So see, okay, it actually makes the point even better. It's there. You can see it. Okay. It got removed because enough people muscled against it and argued that it was ticks, right? And so for a minute, it was saying, yes, they're ticks. And even Grok was like, yep, they're actually ticks. Now I think if you ask it, it says, nope, they can't fly. It's interesting how easy it is to manipulate the AI by simply popularity or enough bots leaning in one direction. But so now it went back to gathering ratings as if it didn't already have it there, because this is this battle back and forth. So the overall point is, if you're going to say people can't, if you comment on a story that's a community note and it turns out to be fake, then you have to we'll DM you and say you have to correct it. Well, what happens if it flip-flops back and forth for a week? See, I think you already know this is going to be abused. It's not about honesty. It's about controlling the narrative. Elon Musk deliberately lies to you about things every single day. He'll choose to ignore very important topics every single day. For example, people in the UK that he loves to talk about censorship, except when he gets censored for saying things about Palestine, he seems to never care about that. Or any number of things. Or, you can get into the whole obvious hypocrisy. People that care about it will care about it regardless. Will care about a white woman getting beat up by a bunch of Muslims. They'll care about a Muslim guy getting beat up by a bunch of white guys. It happens all over the world in every possible way, and it should matter no matter what. But I think we all know it matters in a certain way for these people. It's obvious the things they'll choose to ignore. Actually, I do want to keep those. Oh, damn, I just closed it now. I wanted to keep the one that, I did have this image actually, just so I could see the original. But I'll keep those. I'm going to follow up with this probably tomorrow. Put this off real quick. Now, continuing. Here's another example. Talking about just being incorrect. Sorry, there's something bothering my throat today. So, this is a good example, actually, because I actually agree if this is accurate. If this is accurate, which I'm not, this isn't the point. It's not even about that. It's about the community note again. But if this is exactly the reality of it, I actually agree with this person not being charged with the crime. The point is about Nick Sorter just being wrong and how constantly that happens because all he does is repeat whatever Trump yelled out. But so it says, what the F? President Trump is just revealed. So again, no due diligence, just blind repeating what Trump yelled as if it's fact. Great journalism. Pardoned a man who was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fixing his own truck. That's incorrect. He's also, by the way, just in case you're confused, pardoned a ton of people who have no justifiable reason not to be pardoned. People like Juan Orlando Hernandez or any others who they just go political manipulation. You mean aside from them killing people or stealing or robbing or whatever else? Yeah, it's not politically motivated when you can clearly see they're guilty. They admit to being guilty and get caught later after you pardon them. It's just so stupid how clearly these people are dishonest, left and right, in case you're confused. But so it goes on and says the Democrats have a restriction that if you get caught fixing your tractor, they'll bring you to jail. Do you know that? I actually believe that Trump thinks this is what actually happened because he just repeats what people around him tell him. I actually think it's the same thing. He goes, I pardoned a man last week who was sentenced to 7 years for fixing his own truck. It's not the truth. You can easily look into this. Troy Lake was a professional diesel mechanic convicted for violating the Clean Air Act, which I disagree with in this context. Well, pretty much in general, to be real, by performing emissions deletes on hundreds of commercial tractors for paying customers, not repairing his own truck. Meaning, people came in who paid him to alter their trucks or vehicles to circumvent or manipulate. Basically, for example, I actually did this in Hawaii. I think they're called, now I'm going to forget what it's called. Not a safety check. It's called anyway, there's a thing you have to do there that's different from at least where I grew up in this part of the United States. And you had to go get it done. And all I did was found a guy who could just sign it for me because I knew my car wouldn't pass. And so this is the kind of thing that people do. And my opinion is the idea that the government should have any say around how you deal with the person you're like, I'm paying you to work on my car. Why in the world they have any way to get involved in that's insane to me. Secondarily, how in the world they can tell you you're not allowed to have a car that does the, like to me, it's about freedom here. Now, yes, I can acknowledge that car is probably going to hurt the environment, but if we understand that if not for the government and their like industrialized problem, that guy's car wouldn't make a difference in my opinion. But either way, just simply on the side of freedom and liberty and the idea of making our own free choices and free exchange, there's no way I would argue this guy should be charged with anything because somebody paid him to do something that the government decided was not allowed in regard to like your car and environmental issues. But the simple point is not even about that. It's about, how easy this would have been to get everybody on your side. But Nick just has to go, Trump said he fixed his own truck and just lies and gets, 2.4 million views on something that's just wrong. That's it, guys. And it's important. And of course, community note, do you think is it clear that they're telling people not to engage? Obviously not. They're getting an increase in reach based on the content. And Elon Musk wants you to think they're going to penalize you for being wrong. Clearly not. This is the new media for you guys. Here's an example. Here's Stephen Miller. He says, local judges says it's illegal to restrict migration and that America actually belongs to 8 billion foreigners, not you or your family, and that no matter who you vote for, you will be dispossessed. If SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, doesn't restrain these judges, people will lose the faith in the courts. Okay. Let's since this is a partisan argument and people will probably listen to Grok more, let's see what Grok has to say. No, Miller's framing is not accurate. It's hyperbolic, an exaggeration that distorts the ruling. These policies had placed infinite holds on adjudicating pending applications. So what he's trying to do here is argue I should have read that first, actually. A judge blocked a series of Trump administration measures to give people green cards. So Miller, either being too dumb to know he's wrong or very dishonest, I'm leaning towards the latter, comes out and goes, they just stopped people they're blocking Trump from doing immigration. They're making sure that they let people in, that they say the country belongs to foreigners. Oh, guess what? Not even remotely true. Let's even say this. Let's just even say all that is true. It doesn't make it, the reality is still he's wrong about what just happened here. Doesn't that matter to people anymore? The facts don't matter, it seems, to people in the team sport game. The reality is that they put a hold on people who were in pending applications. People were seeking green cards and asylum who have no criminal records, who didn't have any justifiable legal reason to stop them, but I would argue had something they disliked, whether they were from somewhere, they had certain political opinions, all of which are not legal reasons to do any of this. Now, you understand, see, this is the game they fall into. They can deny people, yes, with really no justification. But since this initiation process had already begun, they need a legal justification to then to turn it down in that case. And so either way, the reality is they just paused them all. The judge then ruled you can't do that on these pending applications for no legitimate reason. So the USCIS lacked statutory regulatory authority for these blanket indefinite pauses on specifically people who were already here and already legally pending and should have been given these cases. Now it says, where's Miller is misleading. He says the ruling does not ban all restrictions or say the U.S. can't control immigration. So why would he lie about that? Because he's tricking people who are not informed in this conversation into thinking that that's what's happening, because he knows he needs you to attack people who are their enemies. So he lies to you. See, if he came out and said, these people are angry that we remove these people's constitutional rights, which is what this amounts to, because yes, even people who are not citizens have constitutional rights, even though Miller will yell the opposite, he's wrong. He just wants you to think that this is what you're fighting for, this country, when what you're doing, what he's doing is fighting against this country. America actually belongs to 8 billion foreigners, or your family would be dispossessed. Complete rhetoric based on literally nothing that's happening in this case. Now, that's not because Grok said. You can look for yourself. The point is that Miller is one of the most dangerous, dishonest people in this administration. He's out here day in, day out, day in and day out, trying to convince you of things that are flatly false. He still argues they won that Supreme Court case, that they lost 0-7. You could easily look the case up yourself. How do these people even exist? Well, we talked in the beginning about the mass delusion we're dealing with. These are the people maintaining that. They need just enough of us out here to pretend that they're actually in charge, to pretend that they actually matter, to pretend that they're actually powerful. And without that, they wouldn't exist. But they have enough of them, it seems, right now. Here's another example. Mario Nawfal. Every single Dem who voted no on the $100 million to fund child exploitation investigations and rescue kids sex trafficking. Well, that makes it sound like there was a standalone bill that had to do with sex trafficking, and all the Democrats says, we don't agree with that, to stop that, we want it to continue. Well, guess what? I think the Democrats are just as ridiculous as Republicans. All of them are corrupt, and very much so don't care about your rights and don't believe in this country. However, that's also false. And it frustrates me that we can't be honest about these things in the larger Twitter game. So here, funds to combat child exploitation added to reconciliation bill. Oh, well, that makes it quite different, doesn't it? $108 million was added in a substitute amendment to the roughly $72 billion enforcement package. So what we're talking about here is a thing that was added. They voted on the entire $72 billion bill that had tons of other things than just that. And then they dishonestly frame it as they just voted to stop child exploitation or voted to keep it going. Now, do I believe they care about that? No, I don't think either side cares about it. Is there evidence that both sides, let's just even say, is there evidence that the Democratic side is caught up in some sort of sexual exploitation? Yes. Same applies to the right. Just look at the Epstein files if you actually care. My point is about manipulating people and obviously framing this as something that it's not. If you are an honest person, even if you think Democrats are the biggest problem in the world, you would still argue that this is dishonest. On a general point about the bill, or rather just on a note about funding bills in general, House passes a Ukrainian aid bill authorizing up to $9 billion for Kiev. The House, right? 18 Republicans. Didn't we talk? Wasn't this supposed to stop? I thought one of the day one. Yeah, well, we're all past that by now, and you guys aren't children. So if you're not a complete moron and dishonest, you already know that you're being lied to by this person. But the Antichrist Jeff says, anyone else notice that when a bill is beneficial to the United States government, it takes hearing after hearing? Or excuse me, I actually read that wrong. His point was, anyone else notice that when a bill is beneficial to the people? That's what he means, to us. It takes hearing after hearing and indefinite committee meetings to maybe pass the House. But when a bill is for Israel or Ukraine, it passes before any of us even knew there was a bill. He makes an excellent point, because that's a choice, guys. These things aren't meant to be tossed around and argued. These things are going to happen whether or not you're even involved. You understand? The things they want to quibble about and Epstein files and accountability. Yeah. Can you piece that together? It's not too difficult. They don't want those things to happen. Now, this is just a funny point. I like them surprised. I didn't see anybody else catch this. What's amazing to me, this person says, is that 10 years apart, there are the exact same clouds in the same position. That is a good point. Now, you might have seen this stupid thing going around. This is his actual post, which simply goes, look, here's the big pool that was clean during Trump, that is clean now under my administration. Here's the pool that's dirty under Biden's or Obama. Excuse me. I just can't talk. Or whoever it is. Well, guess what? You can see the clouds behind it and it's identical. So clearly somebody just altered the picture. My point is that it's a small thing that Trump shares. It shares on his platform that gets billions of views, most likely, based on how many people engage with this and the Twitter platform. And he just lied. Or rather, it's not even about that. Trump just doesn't even care. The truth doesn't factor in. Or he thought it was real. Who knows? It's probably almost more embarrassing. But he's right, though, isn't it? Right? It's just, DC is a magical place. And I put the link down there for those that want to see it. So this is what Trump is posting. Manipulation. Here's the actual post. You can see the names up top. Now let's get into things that matter. We're talking about the infiltration of this country. Well, this is something we've been talking about a very long time. And, really on a large point, we shouldn't even be getting in, shouldn't be dismissing any other possibilities. Like for a long time, largely the Republican side was sort of pushing that it was China, largely Alex Jones and, China comms, and we shouldn't ignore that. I don't see a reason why China wouldn't try to. Any of these governments, I argue, are capable of doing the same kind of things we're talking about. But my point in saying that is it shouldn't be about one or the other. We should care as Americans that a foreign power is circumventing the American will, or however you want to look at it. If it's Israel, it should matter. If it's China, it should matter. What we're going to discuss, obviously, today is that the evidence around Israel doing that is never been, it's been clear your entire life. It really has been, guys. It's been objective and obvious and in your face your entire life. For whatever reason, it's now being acknowledged by the system. I honestly think it's probably because it's too late. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's gone too far. They failed too many times in a row. And so now they just have to adapt. That's what I would argue is the most likely here. That they wouldn't just like this is not something that's going to go, okay, if you got us, now we're going to admit it. That's not how that works, in my opinion. I don't think it's ever gone that way. It's about pushback, and way past the fact that we see it until it gets to a point to where it's like, okay, this is fruitless. No matter what we do, it only keeps getting more obvious. So we shift, right? We point to it. We deviate. We say, basically, here's an example. We finally admit it. Yep, you could see it. Israel's doing this. And then they basically flip it over into it was just Netanyahu. Then Trump turns on Netanyahu. They get him out of the way and everything keeps going under the idea that it was just that bad apple. Piers Morgan already put that out there. Plenty of people have. I don't know if I think that's what's going to happen. There's plenty of variations to it, but realize that this is how I've seen it go in the past, where it becomes another psyop, another effort to get you to think that you're past the problem and to make it so finite, or rather just specific, that it's one person as opposed to the entirety of the government that's taken over this government. Now, we talked about this on the 3rd. The National Defense Authorization Act that further integrates the U.S. and Israeli militaries. Everyone, I think it was Responsible Statecraft, put out a pretty important article about that. And it was just highlighting and again, I showed you 2 or 3 other examples of previous legislation that went over the same idea. This one was just a lot more in your face and a lot more important for the time we're in. But it's not new, you understand? That's why I wrote further integrates these 2 things. But yet it got attention. I argue it's because of the excellent work of all of you out there and everybody doing this, trying to get the average people just to see that it's happening. Now, we talked about a lot of these. I just grabbed a few of them. This one's 2024. We talked about Israel's infiltration of U.S. tech after the pager attack, right? I mean, and as always, had people seen it like we're seeing now, all the evidence was in this show, just like any of the rest of them. It took New York Times or whatever else to make the case for people to suddenly acknowledge or allow it to be discussed in certain circles. Had we been able to engage with it in 2024, maybe we could have stopped the war entirely. Same thing to think about today. Engage with the kind of source material and information and commentators that you believe are ahead of that curve, and doing it with integrity and nonpartisan, objective work, because maybe we can stop it now. But this is a crazy show. And the infiltration, as I'm sure we'll play that clip in again at some point today of what they actually do with that infiltration. But here's another larger example that took place in 2025. Smartphones worldwide silently infected with Israeli spyware. Now, these aren't some TLAV alone report. These are which shouldn't make it any less irrelevant, but these are worldwide reports that we covered in our show. It's Intellexa. Plenty of these examples that go back a long way. This one I just continue to find baffling that nobody really seemed to talk about, and especially right now, guys. Remember that we keep talking about the walls and the app he was using called Telemessage? He got caught using that app that archives signal in the inner circle of the White House, and then he just gets quietly kind of shoved off stage as some smaller role. And what did the entirety media do? They called it Signalgate. You think that was an accident? This was the same thing. State Department revealed to be using Israeli intelligence linked chat app involved in the Trump admin hack. It's obvious, I think, what happened there. Share that just so people can watch that if they want right now. So moving on, the last one we just did. This one was from the 4th. Multiple efforts to militarily fuse Israel with the U.S. And can Trump veto the war powers resolution, which we'll get to in a second. The concurrent launch is what it is. Arguably, no. But that's considered not bound by the law, interestingly enough. We'll get to that to finish. But into the multiple efforts, that's related to this, which we discussed on the 4th. Senate Bill 4615, Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027. Now, we also showed you a previous one from the 119th Congress that talked about other integrations of the U.S. military. We also talked about the previous bill. I think it was from Trump's first administration that discussed basically arguing the IDF was seen the same as the U.S. military when it came to health benefits in this country. That's all real, guys. Those alone should be enough to go, how is that possible? Well, now you're starting to see why it's possible if you haven't caught on so far. Because this government, the Israeli government, or rather the Zionist entity, has completely infiltrated the power structures of this country and plenty of others. You could argue Israel too. It's the same point. Now, Ethan Weishel Talk asked a question, just points out, earlier this week, he says, I talked about how Congress is hiding the U.S.-Israel military relationship in the defense bill. Oh, did you? You're very, very inside. Hiding? He's running for Congress. There's a reason he's pointing this. Come on. This is so disingenuous. You mean aside from, and it's not just people like us. There's been people that are way higher levels in the independent media that have been screaming about this too. Oh, and now suddenly they're acting like they've never heard of this before. These are the people that were calling us crazy and racist for saying this a year ago. Now it's some brand new breaking story. Doesn't that seem weird to everybody? It really should. The point here is that it's not hiding. It's literally on this. It's right on it's a talking point. It's one of the bullet line. It says Israel integration with the military. It's obvious. So when you're trying to make it about being hidden, you're trying to make it seem like you're the one somehow, fighting against that system. I don't believe that. I think this is all very coordinated. There's a second bill that goes further. Yep. And he points to the one we've been discussing. That's it. Just so you can see that this is somebody trying to kind of capitalize on that awareness days after it was being discussed, years really. But Elon comes in and goes, is this accurate, Grok? Does you find that just wildly disingenuous? Do you really think he doesn't understand what we're talking about here? Or that the bill, like on the 6th, hasn't been extensively discussed as this very topic? I think he even commented before. So why would he do that? To make it look like he cares, in my opinion. Of course, I could be wrong. Either way, even Grok says, yes, accurate on the key facts. Section 622, which we showed you. Or did I just close it? Hold on. Right there. Section 622, United States Israel intelligence sharing enhancement. Hardly hidden on either of them. I mean, it's not that people, not even most of Congress actually reads through these, but it's not hidden. Now it says this section of Senate Bill 4615 adds requirements to the National Security Act. It intelligence sharing with Israel, quote, shall not be suspended, reduced, or otherwise materially limited except for a specific and identifiable national concern determined by the president. We read that yet on the 4th. That's insane. So now they're arguing they're somehow lessening this when what they're saying within this one is that now you need some kind of definable national security risk outlined and put forward in order to maybe make the decision to stop the things. That it's so obvious what this is. And on top of that, the idea, this is illegal right now. Understanding international law, even U.S. law, it's illegal to sell weapons to this entity, let alone overlap yourself with them in this way. And of course, what Trump wrote, what the bill says, and I argue he's influencing this, is clearly that if you do try to stop it, you have to submit the information. They have to basically be like, it's almost like you're putting in a form that says like, why are you doing this? What's the justification? Why do you, and it's weird. It's as if, to justify why you wouldn't want to send weapons to a foreign power, you need to like petition the president and outline it on the record why you somehow, they're going to call them racist for doing it. In any case, even Grockel pointed out, which shouldn't surprise you, and I don't think that's genuine from him, as Gen X Girl points out, Israel and its lobby are attempting a complete takeover of our government through a myriad of bills. Now, I don't know if I agree with that in this moment. I simply think these bills are just an additional part of what they're already doing. As I said before, if these bills didn't pass, they would still continue to do exactly what they're doing. We saw it with Massey. We saw it with plenty of things. But I do agree with where it's going. It will make it worse. She adds an important part of this. It's a 10-minute clip here, and she also includes her link to her Substack, where she highlights there's a lot more than even just these two bills, which is what we were saying on the 4th as well. One bill virtually no one is talking about that we talked about on the 4th was the 622. But what she says is, where was it? Anyway, watch the clip and go over the whole thing. Here's her link to it. Point is, there's a lot of different examples showing us that Israel is trying to do this through legislation. And it shouldn't be surprising, guys. They're taking advantage. Now, here's the article that everyone's referencing. One of them, anyway. This is from the 6th. Now, you tell me you haven't heard all of this from any number of people in the IMA and other platforms we've discussed, and TLAV included. Pentagon sees growing espionage threat from Israel. I'll also add, before you even read all of this, what they ultimately do will make the difference. Pointing to this means nothing if they don't do anything about it, right? And that's what a lot of this tends to be, placation. Look, we care, we see it. Vaccines are bad and those are hurting people. Here, now kids, take your COVID shots. Well, what's the difference? They claim one thing, but they still follow through. Yep, it's like everything else. Now, it says recent U.S. intelligence reports, and I guarantee this has to do with why Tulsi Gabbard was pushed out. Recent U.S. intelligence reports have raised concerns about Israeli spy agencies eavesdropping on American negotiators working on a peace deal with Iran, amid rising concern over a more general counterintelligence threat by Israel. Now, come on. This is based on important things, but the idea that Witkoff and Kushner are not already very much assets for the same agenda, I think is part of what this is being done for. Remember, my mind, at least my sense, is this is about trying to cap off the awareness. And we already are all here, is my opinion, and this is about trying to divert it, to channel it in the direction they can control. My point being, Witkoff and Kushner being framed as like the one they're spying on changes the way you view that entire circumstance. Frankly, I think the point is not them spying on U.S. intelligence, but them controlling it and what they were doing with those people as assets or either those that they're influencing. Excuse me, I was going to say infiltrating. Those that they're influencing or those that they outright control. Just my opinion, but realizing what we saw with them and even people within that very room back when they were still meeting in person, said those two were basically Israeli assets. It was on the record, covered by mainstream media in this country. Now, of course, they could be wrong, but look at what they've done. Look, Witkoff is the reason they still spin that 60% number lie. That still keeps circulating. The White House put out its own post and interview with 60 Minutes where they lied about that to everybody. The 60% of about 1,000 pounds was on the record with the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's within their safeguard agreement that's publicly known and publicly stated as a fact because it's not a problem, according to anybody who understands the situation. It's allowed. And that they sit down and produce that, and then Witkoff tells the news they were secretly gloating about how much they have. Why would they even do that in that circumstance? It's the kind of stupidity that they play on. That they know it's the lowest common denominator. Let's put it that way. They know it's the kind of people that they will go at. They'll aim at that when they're desperate, in my opinion. And I think that's what a lot of this conversation is. It says Israel and the United States have long known and tolerated that each was spying on the other. Well, it's funny how we never say that out loud until now. Yes, that's obvious. Anybody who basically understands how countries operate already knew that that was happening. But it's not what you get when you talk about it. You say that now, people, before this article, and you're a conspiracy theorist. The idea that Israel was ever spying on this country in the minds of current people, some people in the team sport game, is irrational and crazy. And they're our biggest ally. But it's always been happening. And I'll show you obvious examples like this, where it was publicly reported in 2019 that they were putting Stingray devices on the White House, and plenty of other examples that nobody wants to talk about. And it says, where were we? But an intensified Israeli effort to learn about U.S. positions in talks with Iran has crossed a line. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's what this is even about. My opinion is we're getting to the point where we're seeing the big picture, and this is about trying to deviate it about Israel spying, but just about Iran because Trump's pulling away from Israel. That's not what's happening, in my opinion. Even though I do agree that there's some kind of a deviation there, I think it's pure self-interest because Trump is looking like a fool day by day, and he has to do what's best in his own interest. I don't believe there's some kind of a deviation when it comes to the real larger plan, or even that they're capable of that. Right? I mean, this is about trying to frame it as somehow unique to this one talking point, and that ultimately that Trump is the one starting to stand up for himself and push away. It's the same thing, as Caitlin Johnstone pointed out, Axios has done for years, lying about Biden in the same way. The same thing Alex Jones tried to do in 2025. See, we told you they're going to break apart. We knew it. That was apparently always the plan, at least the illusion of that. U.S., it says, basically intensified their efforts to learn about what they were saying in the meeting, even though I think it's pretty clear that they're the ones dictating what they get said, or what they say and what happens. The reports include concerns that Israel has stepped up its efforts to eavesdrop on senior American officials. That I agree with, but I doubt it's Witkoff. And it lists Elbridge A. Colby, the Pentagon's top policy official, and one of its main deputies. So the point being is that the Pentagon, yes, I do argue that. I think that that's what we're actually dealing with. Like I made the point with people like Hegseth, guys. The guy's he's the head of the department, and he is a hardcore religious Zionist. You don't think that he's speaking with Netanyahu when he's not supposed to? My opinion, but I don't doubt it for a second. And I think what we're talking about is that kind of infiltration at a high level across this government through things like Palantir and different security things that don't look like Israel. Completely my opinion. All I want you to consider here is that this is actually happening to a degree more than just the Iran conversation and that debate or the alleged negotiation. Another report written by the Defense Intelligence Agency, Gabbard's previous role, and other military intelligence offices and focused on earlier events going back several years. That's important. So the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, reporting on years back that the counterintelligence threat level posed by Israel had been increased in recent weeks to the top level, from high to critical. An ally? Okay, to me, this shows a level within this department that recognizes the real threat, recognizes this is not America first. That's the deviation that I see. That's a hard line to draw with what we're dealing with right now. But I think that's where you would draw it if it existed. That if we're talking about people that are suddenly realizing that they all yell America first, but some of them don't mean America. That's what I think we're dealing with. And now you're getting this kind of report that is coming out and certain people are acting like it's somehow false because the White House executive branch and the Israeli executive branch say so. Seems like asking the criminals whether they're guilty. Now it says the report to which the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency contributed outlines various efforts by Israel to spy on American military personnel and government officials. We're talking about inside the Iran discussions. We're talking about all over foreign policy. We're talking about many examples over the years using Stingray devices, examples of people's phones during the ongoing Gaza and Lebanon and everything else, like Americans' phones. Why is this even a shock to some people? It blows me away. They've been doing this publicly everywhere in the world. Now it says the reports. Make sure I'm going to reports and the intensified concern about Israel spying came at an especially sensitive time. Israel and the U.S. have been fighting the war against Iran together, apparently, and have never had such close military coordination. Exactly the point, as they do right now. And with Israeli military officers working side by side with their American counterparts at U.S. Central Command, almost as if they're controlling it. I don't know why that's hard to see. They've got figureheads at the head points of the controlling parts of the U.S. Central Command. And Trump's in his office eating ice cream or whatever, and they're just doing what they're doing, and he feels like he's in control. I think this is becoming very clear to people. Make sure I didn't miss this part. Hold on. Yeah, okay. There's the phone part I wanted to reference. That's what I was kind of going with that last one. The U.S. military is sharing huge amounts of tactical and operational information with its Israeli counterparts. But and again, this is whether or not they pass the National Defense Authorization Act or the Senate part of these. Those are already happening. So these things only enshrine, like it legalize this very alarming practice, excuse me. But senior American officials said that Israel is looking for insights into Trump's strategy, whether you take that at face value or not. The new warning could potentially complicate efforts to further integrate military war planning between U.S. Central Command and Israel, especially if the Pentagon makes a decision to place new restrictions on information shared with Israeli officers. Yeah, it could potentially complicate the efforts to integrate military planning. This is the New York Times talking about the concern of spying on Americans by Israel and saying that we've never been more integrated militarily, as if that's a concern, and then goes on to very benignly just go, yeah, that complicates their efforts to militarily plan. Oh, you mean merge the militaries together? It seems like my feeling on that is a deliberate avoidance of the most obvious part of this. Now, why wouldn't you lean into the largest discussion is right at this moment, you've got legislation literally trying to fuse them together. Wouldn't that make this article way more profound? It really would. The Defense Intelligence Agency report was drafted after 8 incidents in which American defense personnel in Israel detected that software to tap their communications had been surreptitiously installed on their phones. That is Gabbard's former position, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And that's the highest level at this point, as we know. And what they're saying is they had American intelligence personnel that were in Israel that got software surreptitiously installed on their phones. That's, again, I mean, it's worth understanding the kind of thing, and this is not a joke, the kind of things that, at the very least, they claim they do. And so with all of the reporting, understand that this is something that is not to be dismissed, as they're becoming aware that Americans are seeing what they're actually doing, the infiltration. And the tech part of it really can't be ignored.
They buy it from, or I think they were buying it from.
We have an incredible array of possibilities of creating foreign companies that have no way being traced back to Israel. Shell companies over shell companies who affect the supply chain to our favor. We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors. The world is our stage.
Did you see any surprises in Gaza?
Surprises?
Yeah.
Like you mean intelligence surprises?
Pages, walkie-talkies. Do you know how many treated equipment do we have in these countries? You don't. I do.
You mean you mean booby-trapped equipment?
Not only booby-trapped.
And spying.
Manipulated equipment. All right?
In which countries are you talking about?
All the countries that you can imagine.
Seems relevant every single time. And as every time we bring it up, the point is simply that Israel set up that interview. So they're claiming that. Not that you have to believe them. They could certainly be lying. But it's the same point. So what's more concerning, that they want you to believe they can bomb you through your phone, or that they're actually setting people up to be bombed through their phones? You know, it probably that is actually happening, but why would it be dismissed if they're threatening to bomb Americans through their phones or whatever you want to frame it as? It's obvious to me that what they're saying is that they've got booby-trapped equipment and devices in every country in the world, whether you believe them or not. And then, of course, we can see that they did this to Lebanon. So it's not hard to wrap your mind around. Overall, what you're saying is that in the midst of all of this, while Americans are realizing what's actually happening, and Trump has never been more unpopular because of it, the Defense Intelligence Agency was saying that Americans, personnel who went to Israel, got something put on their phones. Doesn't that alarm anybody with what we just heard? It really should. The Defense Department declined to comment. Interesting. The White House, I mean, you're talking about American intelligence being manipulated by a foreign power, and you don't want to comment on that? The White House official, speaking on the condition of anonymity, on a condition that their name not be used, I guess, why wouldn't, that's funny. Same thing. What's weird why they wouldn't say that? They said the account was false. So you have the Department of Defense, who doesn't want your name to be heard, who goes, not true, and then hides in the shadows, right? A spokesperson for the Israeli embassy in Washington also disputed the claims that Israel poses a counterintelligence threat. saying that Israel does not spy on American officials. I mean, think about the nerve they have to even say that. So first of all, the reality is, as anybody who's not a moron would acknowledge, they all do it. That's an easy thing to prove. So for them to come out and just go, we don't even do that, guys, they're aiming at the stupid people in the room. They know that we see them. And that's just blatant. And so what it shows you is the Department of Defense won't even comment on it. And Israel says it's not happening. We don't even do that. So the two people involved with this, the potentially U.S. government that's compromised and the Israeli government that's potentially the compromiser, both stand up and go, fake news. And we ignore all the evidence. You ignore all the people in the DIA and the different groups and the Pentagon and the State Department who are all going, yeah, this is pretty obvious. And you listen to the ones who stand to benefit from lying about it. Seems pretty stupid. The spokesperson for the Israeli embassy said it's not true. The developments were discussed by several current and former U.S. officials speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive intelligence matters. They said that in some respects, the counterintelligence warning is no surprise. Israel has long engaged in aggressive intelligence collection operations against both its enemies and its allies, as does the United States. Yes, guys, this is a basic understanding. Still, Israel's counterintelligence threat level is now higher than any other ally, higher than some, and not some, if it's critical, it's as high as it gets, higher than adversarial countries that are not at critical. That's pretty wild. I mean, that shows you that there are people at the intelligence community that recognize Israel is the highest level of threat. There's no way to misunderstand that. How is that the one Trump works with? How is that the one that is allowed to access your personal database and absorb all of your personal information to be able to train their AI models? Who's allowed to use your data to bomb people in foreign countries? Or any number of things are highlighting, or using your money to continue to commit a genocide. The aggressiveness of the Israeli intelligence collection is on top U.S. officials during the second administration of Trump has been unhinged, according to one official. Two senior U.S. military officials said that American personnel, particularly those serving in Israel or with Israeli counterparts, were well aware of the counterintelligence risk before the new report, because they are. You can listen to John Kirkow tell you how they, disgusting things, not from spying on American allies while they're in Israel to him being there with his wife and coming home to have his dog's tail cut off and wrapped in a towel, or find their Christmas presents stolen. He spoke about this at length, guys. And he says that was Mossad. It's just disgusting level of stuff. Why? Psychological stuff, guys. Who knows? Maybe because they just wanted to. I don't know why you would even deny that with what we see every single day in this country. The point is that it happened according to John Kirkow. The officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal assessments said U.S. personnel employ a range of security procedures and protocols to help counter the threat and to protect their cell phones and other electronic devices, especially when traveling in Israel. So they obviously know about it. The report says counterintelligence incidents began increasing in late 2024 as the Biden administration pressed Israel to curb its attacks on Gaza, and continued in 2025 as the Trump administration weighed options to attack Iran. Yeah, hashtag two-party illusion, guys, at least from their perspective, but I think you'd understand. I mean, at least I believe it is obviously the reality. They're the same thing. It is the same agenda. The difference is just about how they have to appease the people around them here and how Israel works through both of them. In 2021, Israeli military intelligence officers were caught. So remember, up here, that we don't do that, Israel says. We don't spy on Americans. In 2021, Israeli military intelligence officers were caught planting listening devices at the DIA. This is Gabbard's former position, and this is in 2021. They were caught planting devices at the headquarters. Last year, officers from Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence agency, were discovered to have tried to plant a listening device in a Secret Service vehicle. Mainstream media, and yet that doesn't already show you that Israel's doing this? It would if you cared to look. And I'm not speaking to you guys. I know you guys are already seeing this, but somebody new who's maybe still balking at this is even happening. It's always been there. And again, this goes back to Trump's last administration. This is not new. It goes back well before these administrations. Now, it says the tendency of some senior Trump administration officials to fly on private aircraft, and I think this is also very important, and I think it's by design, or to conduct national security business on their personal cell phones, and to reject staffing from U.S. embassies abroad, made them especially vulnerable targets for the spy services of allies and adversaries alike, said a former senior U.S. official who has dealt extensively with Israel. So remember, they're using their own personal computers, their own personal cell phones, all largely under the guise that somehow, the deep state, which is not, adversarial governmental things. That's not something you should dismiss. But understand that they're not really fighting that. It's the main point. And so it's using what we're afraid of, or aware of rather, to justify why they can basically allow open access to some foreign adversary, or to us anyway, not to them. But so that's what I read this as, like we talked about before. Back to the missing ethics pledges of his entire administration, it seems, and how what that obviously opened was this exact circumstance where there is no legal bind for them to just simply open these doors or to not have to worry about hiding anything from this ally. Other current officials also acknowledge the use of personal cell phones by Trump's top officials and have made easy targets for eavesdropping. Back to Walz and his app. You think that was an accident? You see, you can frame this as incompetence. I do think it's part of it, but I think it's incompetence to hide that it's a plan. Like you're hiding behind a veneer of incompetence, which even though it's there, to hide the fact that it's an obvious choice, I think. And said it's not entirely clear why Mr. Colby in the Pentagon, in charge of the Pentagon policy, would be a target. Obviously, I think it's clear, but he is one of the most prominent proponents inside the U.S. government of a restricted foreign policy. Mr. Domino is in charge of the Pentagon policy for the Middle East, making him a person of natural interest to Israel. That's one of the people they're spying on. This is not something to be disregarded, but how much you want to bet this does not really go anywhere, that none of these people get looked into, that neither the Trump administration or whatever next Democratic disaster comes into play is going to care. It'll be a show about looking, but no one actually gets, or at the very least, even if somebody gets held accountable, which I expect at some point because we're calling for it, it won't change, right? Put someone in jail, the thing stays the same, right? Accountability matters, but the problem right now is realizing that we no longer even have control, if we ever did, over the outcome of this country or the policy. The next is this is just reporting to it. Pentagon officials suspect Israel tried to spy on U.S. officials involved in Iran talks. So it's even coming out in Haaretz. It's just re-reporting on what the New York Times was saying. Now, Mark Levin comes out and says, it's a false story, you POS, to Thomas Massie. How stupid can you be? Both countries deny it. And I just love that. What a good journalist you are, Levin. Right? So the people who are accused of the crime come out and go, that's not true. And you just blindly go, they said so. It's laughable, right? Now, of course, we can consider that it could be false. That's obviously one of the possibilities. But I just laugh at these fake journalists who just love to take sides and act like it's always smart when they are certain about something without the evidence to back it up. Massey simply says, Pentagon sees growing espionage threat from Israel and highlights the article. They denied it, you stupid. Such an obvious manipulator. Of course, AIPAC to come take his side. And the Daily Beast, although Israel is an ally of the U.S., numerous intelligence reports and experts raise concerns about their alleged Israel attempts to spy on Iran discussions. See, that's how they're all framing it. It is so not about the Iran discussions, if you understand what's happening. AIPAC, White House official, this entire story is false and sourced to someone who doesn't have any knowledge of what's going on. Oh, you mean the anonymous people that we don't know and that weren't cited, and how somehow you know that? And that's what this says right here. The Post quotes anonymous White House officials while ignoring the DIA's own reporting on the matter, which is from Gabbard's that it's happening. So the allegedly American entity comes out and goes, that's not what this random unknown person says from the White House, which I bet doesn't even exist. And what you're ignoring is the actual reports that came from the very government that you're talking about. It's just so obvious to Americans. And I argue left and right across the board right now what's actually happening. So here's a lot of these. Yeah, go start. We wasn't breaking. We talked about that earlier. That's the point about the Secret Service cars. That's the larger report from the New York Times. But there's a lot of those in the chat. It's just the same point about the idea of the listening devices in the cars. You have to understand, all of you guys, this is something that's been going on so incessantly for such a long time. This is just one of the examples that I referenced because it's on an article most people can see and will, average people will look at, accused of planning mysterious spy devices near the White House. Here's an example that the man who laughs shared with me from, this goes back to, what was it? I think of the date right here, 1986. So tell us again, now it's brand new. U.S. an intelligence target of the Israelis, officials say. Here's the CIA and the actual printed out article. I mean, this has always been the reality. At some point, they actually were successful, I think, and turned it into nothing. I mean, because realize if they're infiltrating at some point, then it would be more and more obvious. But all you see is more and more infiltration and less conversation about it. I find that quite pretty obvious. There's evidence that Israel has run intelligence operations in the United States for years, despite Israeli assertions that Jonathan Pollard, who is a spy and was caught for being a spy, was an isolated episode. But you can read it. It just goes back a long way. It's not secret. This has been happening a long time. Now, Mario Nawfal, of course, comes out and shares, bombshell, the Pentagon raised Israel's counterintelligence level to critical, the highest since possible designation, over concerns Israel's aggressively spying. Oh, that's an interesting word to use, even though that's not what's actually being used. Let me show you how an actual report would go from an honest reporter. Pentagon raises level of espionage threat to critical. The Defense Intelligence Agency has raised its threat to assessment to critical. Why? Where after U.S. personnel in Israel found spyware installations on their phone. That's what the report was. But this guy comes out and says they raised it over concerns that they were spying, implying that it's not definitive. I'm telling you, this is not by accident. These people will constantly manipulate in the interest of everybody else. Not Americans, guys. And of course, this is the one Alex Jones will share. NBC News report is reporting the Pentagon. No, it's the New York Times, actually. NBC is reporting on the New York Times report. But it says Israel's the top national security threat facing the United States. Oh, so brave of you, Alex, to come out and now say what you called us black pill for saying in 2024. But I simply said, of course, you shared this. And I called him out before saying concerns. You mean aside from Israel getting caught doing this during those two administrations? Now, it doesn't stop, guys. It doesn't stop. It's an effort to gaslight. Same kind of thing here. This is the report you all saw already from plenty of others. And this was Netanyahu's own document being written to Stutzman in Congress saying, thank you for using my plan, the plan to integrate the militaries. It's all very easily proven. And Alex says on the 6th, in case you missed it, here's Netanyahu in his own words thanking congressmen for his plan to take over military intelligence services. Brad Miller says complex psyop. Now, I think it's important to understand what he's ultimately saying here. And I agree with him. This is what I'm ultimately arguing. But what I want to highlight is first the example of sharing the doubt-filled discussion of what's actually happening from people that are still siding with Trump, to be honest, and plenty of other examples, or Elon Musk, who he still tells you was a good guy, which is insane. But then to come out and try to go, but look, see, it's Netanyahu's plan to do this. Well, really what we're talking about, if you look at Jones's discussion here, is that this is getting into the Trump pulling away from Netanyahu discussion, and it's about back and forth, and ultimately this is being forced on him. It's not the truth, in my opinion. And what Brad Miller is ultimately saying is this is not real, guys. This letter and all of this back and forth is somehow theater. And it's simply what he writes here. He says, with the current conflicting narratives about the U.S. relationship with Israel, remember how complex psyops work. They often involve competing narratives and layered deceptions. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to assume that's what it is. Maybe it's not. But I agree with him. And I think that what we're dealing with, especially when it comes to the Trump's angry at Netanyahu and they're yelling at each other on the phone, it is a complete deception to keep you thinking things might be shifting. And I think that's what this really comes down to. Now, another example of this, here's Pete Hegseth. Rather, this is Dinesh D'Souza sharing this clip about Hegseth saying he's announced an internal audit of Bill Gates' connected company, Microsoft. Wow. I guess they're going to finally look into Israel infiltrating Microsoft, huh, guys? Oh, wait, I guess I spoke too soon. And their digital cloud system for allegedly being used by Chinese nationals to hack the government systems in August of 2025. Now, look, like I said, shouldn't be dismissed. Obviously, that's something that China is capable of. But what I think is hilarious, as I'm not going to go in depth because I've done it 1,000 times. Here's a good article. There's plenty of them out there. This is from 2025, how Microsoft became a hub for Israeli intelligence. It's one of the most obvious parts of the conversation. The people at the top are packed from a unit 8200 and Israeli intelligence. Now, that doesn't have to mean you can guarantee that they're working for something else, but it absolutely implies that there's an overlap. And it shows you, and I've gone over extensively of them telling you from Israel as well as the individuals that we work for the Israeli intelligence, that we continue to work towards we build companies like we just played for you to manipulate supply chains in our favor. They literally tell you that. My point is for them to suddenly, in the midst of all this, while Microsoft and Bill Gates, by the way, and plenty of others are basically merging into the larger agenda with Trump, and you're going to go, we're going to investigate Microsoft and prove that China. Guess what? It goes nowhere. Mark my words. It'll be a narrative, if or maybe nothing at all, that will amount to nothing. Because one, I don't think that's what Microsoft is infiltrated by. And two, it's about trying to deviate or distract from what the real problem is. As we're being infiltrated and everyone's discussing it by Israel, you go, look over there for China and Microsoft, one of the most obvious Israeli infiltrated companies on the planet. I'm telling you guys, I just think it's absolutely ridiculous how clearly this religious Zionist is trying to deflect from what we're all dealing with. And of course, Dinesh, this guy is a hardcore whatever, he's a team player. Let's put it that way. Now, to finish this segment, and then just very quickly to end with the absurdity of the ongoing Iran conversation in regard to Trump, there are some new developments, by the way. It appears there's been bombings that have taken place, but we'll show you that in a second. Before we do that, let's finish with the overlap here. So the technocratic side of this, we could have done another 2 hours on just how that intertwines with this topic, but I wanted that to be standalone. But don't forget how clearly whether it's spyware, which Israel's the leading entity in the world when it comes to infiltrating spyware, which is not secret. Even Trump has contracts with them for Paragon Solutions, even though that group has been openly found to be infiltrating journalists and governments around the world. Again, one of the many points that literally can't be denied that prove that they're infiltrating. But Palantir, and this is from a UK perspective, guys. Well, technically, this is a U.S. I'll let this speak for itself. The point is, we're talking about Palantir as a U.S. sort of, I wouldn't even call it that. I think they're a global sort of international entity. I think that's obvious. The point, though, is that it's about the infiltration of the contracts themselves, controlling of the military assets. And if we understand that Palantir is obviously intertwined with Israel, it just makes it one more point. But you could take it wherever. I think Palantir in this way alone is alarming. But I think it's important to see Israel and their role they play through this as well. But to include this, I think it's relevant.
It's absurd and insane that we have a rogue US military contractor handling our most sensitive personal data. Your devices
in the UK, she's talking about,
are going to be monitored 24 hours a day. Palantir's had a very secretive contract with GCHQ. Palantir has a contract running our nuclear missile program. We have no national security. This company should be nowhere near the NHS. We have entered into a kind of colonial contracts with this superpower. Peter Thiel is an incredibly dangerous individual.
The slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety.
J.D. Vance is a sort of wholly owned product of Peter Thiel. Jeffrey Epstein, he was a co-investor in an Israeli surveillance company. The thing I find most alarming about this and most worrisome is that...
Guess to leave that hanging. Anyway, it's just very obvious. It's all around the world, and that's just one little taste on how other countries are dealing with the same thing, guys. Now, here's a clip from 2019 talking about the White House, Trump, Israel, and spying, even though apparently it's a bombshell to people right now that haven't seen it before.
So now, according to this Politico report, there's been this result of a counterintelligence probe launched into the matter by the FBI and others, and it has shown that Israel was behind the placement of these devices. That's based, it sounds like from this report, on an analysis of who was taking data off of them, because not all spy agencies can do this. Israel is strongly denying this, as you know.
Of course. All right. So, yeah, you just mentioned, Olivia, that Israel is reacting by denying that.
Yeah, make sure you reiterate that part very carefully. So clearly it's an unpopular report. What she's saying is the reality. The FBI report showed that, but they denied it because the executive branch does what it wants anyway. Pretty easy to see. Now, a couple more points to include before we finish on the Iran discussion. Justin Amash points out Stephen Miller talking about FISA 702. I just continue to be baffled by this because this is a part of the larger point, even going back to Elon Musk and his community notes and the kind of Orwellian control of what you talk about and whether it's true, or the censorship on the platforms, or Israel pushing all of that. FISA 702 was something that was roundly, the entirety of the Trump team was like, that's bad and Biden's using it. And everybody on Trump's team said those things were bad when they weren't in power. The entirety of the Republican side was telling you why this was something that needed to be stopped. Now it's in unison. They're like, why we have to keep it? Again, honest people are not confused by that, guys. They're not stupid. They go, you guys just said that was a bad thing. I know it's a bad thing because we don't like it. And then they go, now it's good because X, Y, and Z. Well, they're not stupid. There's a category of people that will go along with it because maybe I'm wrong, or, it's a little, I think it's insecurity. My point, though, is the people like before who were promised these things that never got them, they didn't get it. They don't want to just keep pretending like they got things they didn't, guys. Not everybody is blind supporters for partisanship. And I think this is just so outrageous. Miller writes, FISA 702 is the authority for surveillance on foreign soil. Now, understand what he's carefully ignoring is the fact that even if it's, and by the way, it's not even only foreign soil, but the point being is that in the process of whatever they do, it absorbs a lot of random American information that they then are able to look at later whenever they want with no warrant. And it's been abused by every administration left and right. And most Americans seem to know that and want it to stop, and they still don't care. Now they're gaslighting you again and acting like you want immigrants or you hate America if you want them to stop the thing that they told you was bad. And he goes on to say a libertarian demand, and it's just the core of U.S. security, surveillance of foreign soil. Are you kidding me? You're arguing that the core of U.S. security is surveilling foreign countries? This guy's a monster, guys. This is the guy fighting for Zionism and the whole conversation. It's not, he's barely even hiding it. And so what we're talking about is the guy trying to bring us down like to a point of absolute totalitarianism under the guise of America, or whatever you want to say, a guise under what we claim America is. A libertarian demand to make Secretary of War get approval from liberal DC judges. See, again, the idea that it's only liberal judges push hardly. In my opinion, most of them have stood up and said, the point is not even about the current understanding or opinions of the different judges. As every other case, he makes it about liberal radical judges, and then you can look and find out that there was a Republican judge that denied his case. He just says things because he gets momentum because team sport players will share it. I don't think most people even believe in this guy anymore. The ones who targeted Trump, it's madness, he says. No conservative aim is ever served through subservience to leftist DC judges. Well, as Justin Amass says, under FISA 702, the government collects massive amounts of data on Americans while targeting foreigners overseas. Then they unconstitutionally search that data without a warrant for info on Americans. The libertarian demand he's whining about, it's called the Fourth Amendment. This guy is the most un-American person that's ever held this position, it feels like. Hard to say you know that for sure. He is an un-American person, let's put it that way. I'm sure you sense, I just truly feel this guy alarms me for any number of reasons that are easy to prove and some that are just innate. It's a feeling that I get when this person is there and it's not about anything political. It's the moment I first saw him, before I even knew who he was, he gives me a bad sense. But that's not thing I think you should be guided by. It's worth pointing out. Same thing. Stephen Miller says, across the West, leftist judicial tyranny. As far as I can tell, he's almost the only one still trying to make this argument that literally anything they don't get is all because of leftist judges, even though almost every time you can prove, especially when it's Supreme Court, that it's not even the case, that most of them are Republicans or any other circumstance. Or wait, I think it was either way. The point is it comes down to a reality that judges in many cases have been Republican leaning and appointed by Trump or his people, or cases where the judges in general are not all liberals. And he just lies to you. It never stops with this guy. It says that that leftist judicial tyranny propels Marxism and reverses patriotic reforms. I mean, think of how funny it is. Like, what if everybody in this country believed Marxism was the best thing? Does that mean is that now wrong? Is that how democracy works? So all he's really doing is framing his opinions. And I don't agree with any of it. I think all of it bad. Marxism, democracy, government bad, guys, in case you're confused. The point, though, is that what you're saying there is that your vision for what it should be is what's right. And that's patriotic because I agree with that. Well, if 90% of the country wants something else, you would call them terrorists and you're terrorists and call them the terrorists. This is how this works. And it says blocking FISA 702 to demand more power for leftist judges. Why would it be leftist judges? Why would it be more power for leftist judges if the idea is stopping the thing that we all know we want to stop because you're spying on Americans? Is a continuation of the same tactic. Ideological error that gives the left decades of institutional God, this guy, I think he's just trying to confuse people. And Justin again says the Fourth Amendment is the real tyranny. Stephen Miller, translated. I mean, the guy's directly attacking the Constitution, and people don't care. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says America faces real threats from foreign adversaries. terrorists, cyber actors, and hostile intelligence services. Section 702 remains one of our nation's most effective tools. You gotta love that. From the very administration that told you that they wouldn't stop until they stopped the Biden administration from illegally spying, and now they just rationalize it like everything else. Telling you guys, Americans are not this stupid. You don't just, this is the equivalent of coming in and saying, we got to stop the immigration, and then coming in and going, we need more. Why would anybody think that makes sense, guys? They're not all that dumb. I don't care if you think half of them are. At least half of them would be like, what the F? That's the opposite of what you said. And that's what's happening right now. The problem, though, is you have a false media apparatus that lies to everybody. I don't think the left or the right are even remotely represented by the majority of Americans today. But here we are. Democrats are choosing. So what you're basically saying is Democrats are trying to stop them from having FISA. So wouldn't that make them in the same position that you were holding before you were in this position? That's confusing. Not really. Okay, so this is an important point to understand in regard to censorship and what they're trying to do to suppress ideas. And where do you think the suppression of Palestinian ideas comes from, guys? I know it's not that hard to recognize, okay? It's very obvious who is aiming at fighting the Palestinians today. And how easy it is to see that people suddenly can't talk about Palestine anywhere, especially in the UK, without being arrested or removed from their graduation. In this case, as this person simply writes, it's crazy to think that in the 90s, as I was recently pointing out, that there were Klan marches that were allowed to march through America because it's important to have, and I agree, to allow free speech and freedom of ideology, even if it's offensive. And here we are today, where a 17-year-old valedictorian was literally stopped in the middle of her speech, and you'll hear why, for simply acknowledging the Palestinians among numerous other examples. Or I guess maybe you could argue it's the ICE point. I'm not sure. Either way, I'll let it play for itself. This person comes up and stops her mid-speech and then basically almost withholds her graduation because of it. This is the world we live in today, guys. And it's, I mean, honestly, what we've always lived in, but now it's becoming more obvious. And this is the kind of stuff that you don't, where's Elon Musk griping about this? It's the same exact principle, isn't it? I care whether you're white or black or Jewish or Muslim if your rights are being suppressed. Like anybody honest should. In this case, this person, whatever her topic is, I don't care if this was Laura Loomer talking about how Muslims shouldn't exist. I would still stand up for her right to say the thing. And I've actually done that, by the way, even how disgusting that she is. Here's the clip. And by the way, in case that was confusing, I'm talking about Laura Loomer right there, not this person in the clip.
Given a voice to stay silent and
This 17-year-old teenager from Clayton, North Carolina says her welcome speech to graduates was cut off by a school administrator after she made these remarks.
I have one last thing to say. Every single person here has a voice, and we are privileged to have the freedom to use it when so many people around the world are struggling and suffering to be heard. Whether it's the millions suffering in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, Afghanistan, and so many other countries around the world, these are the families being torn apart by ICE.
Okay, so it's clear she just simply lists off Palestine in a lot of months, Sudan, Congo, a lot, and families being separated by ICE. Now, in what world, especially in college, would any of that be restricted speech?
These are not distant issues. They are happening right now as I speak.
She came up to me and she's like, if you don't stop speaking right now, you're not graduating.
That's what Leen Hajaz says the administrator said to her in this moment when she cut off Hajaz's speech.
Wild.
And because of those remarks, unlike the rest of her fellow graduates who picked up their diplomas after the ceremony, Hajaz says she was told,
"You're getting your diploma withheld."
A Johnston County Public Schools spokesperson tells CNN that Hajaz was, quote, awarded her diploma and that her speech was cut off because, quote, school administrators intervened in order to maintain the integrity and focus of the program in real time. This action was not about limiting a student's voice, but about ensuring that a school-sponsored event remained consistent with its intended purpose.
I mean, these are such cowards at an academic level. I mean, think about how cowardly that is. Like it didn't have to do with what she just exactly said. I mean, they're just such, you can't even own that. Like if you're going to go up there and say you're not allowed to say those things in front of an entire graduation ceremony, you damn well better stand behind your actions. Just cowards, all of them. And so really you can clearly see that if she stood up there and said, we want to stand up for, anyway, I'm not going to assume. The point is simply that you could fill in a blank with any number of other things that would have been somewhat similar, that they wouldn't have said the integrity. Like based on that, then why is she even speaking? Why was she given the allowance to say things if you're simply her saying things you don't want, or by the point of their statement, things at all? Because if it wasn't about the content, then what is it that she's speaking aloud? See, you can't, you know, anybody can see through that. That's them just trying to shield themselves from the worst of it because they know we see what just happened.
Voice, but about ensuring that a school-sponsored event remained consistent with its intended purpose. JCPS respects students' rights to express their views and encourages thoughtful dialogue in appropriate settings.
Or I bet you what happened was that one teacher made her own decision because she's politically motivated. And then, you know, by the right side of the conversation, if you will, I don't think it's really left or right, but you understand it's not the woke left censoring. No, we're talking about the other side of the conversation right now, guys. And because she possibly decided to stop it of her own accord, then the administration just kind of, you know, makes it abstract, muddies the waters, and just backs her. The administration supports her, and we didn't do that, you know, as opposed to saying this person decided something that went against our policy and putting them under the bus, you just kind of back it up. I mean, you could look at it either way. The point is, nobody thinks that wasn't about what she said. It's obvious.
The district also said the content of graduation speeches is approved by staff ahead of the event. Hijaz says she did not submit her unscripted remarks for approval and that she received her diploma 4 days after graduation. Hijaz says her family and friends have supported her throughout because
my sole purpose of saying everything was to advocate for people.
I mean, whatever it is, you know, at the end of the day, she's a person who decided to show some courage and say something that she knew was going to be unpopular, at least in regard to the school. So that deserves respect, even if you disagree with it. It takes courage to do that. And so what she was doing right there was acknowledging that there are people that are suppressed in the world. And apparently the power structure, even at an academic level, is just not having it. I don't know how we're confused by that. I mean, that's a dark thing to see. And again, I argue it's just this encroaching kind of, you know, restricting thing because people are starting to break free from the mold. Take that for what you will. I really think it's that abstract. It's like just what people are just finding the freedom to break through things they haven't before. I really believe that. So here to end with this Iran discussion, which again, it's very simple to understand. And now in the chat, if you've seen more things since some of the recent bombings and things that might have taken place over the last hour, put it in the chat. I'll include it. But just to make this quick, it's the same story. In case you're new to the Iran conversation we're right back in the swing of Trump saying, Trump tells NBC that Washington and Tehran are nearly at a breakthrough, saying the two sides are very close to reaching an agreement. I'm not making that up. That's June 7th or June 5th or June 1st or, you know, you go back, May 27th, May 5th, May, you know, down the line, April 15th. Over and over and over and over and over and over. It's infuriatingly stupid. I just can't believe it still happens. I don't understand why he wouldn't just say, like, maybe even use different terms, right? We're nearly, I mean, I don't even know. Like, I'm just blown away by the fact that they just keep doing that. Trump also insisted that Lebanon remains a part of the broader discussion and the U.S. will not ease or remove sanctions on Iran until the final deal is reached. Okay, in the meantime, even though Trump said it, they're still bombing Lebanon. Hasn't stopped. Pretty dumb, isn't it? Like, just like painfully stupid. And as Daniel McAdams says, how many times must we hear this gibberish? Apparently one more, guys. So Murray here did a really good job. I've seen a few people do this. He did a really good job on this, just to kind of try to encapsulate the utter stupidity of this ongoing narrative. And again, you could probably fit in 15, 20 more of these exact things, and it really would do it even more justice. He says, the Iranian Navy, which has been destroyed 8 times, has apparently closed the Strait of Hormuz again, because the United States, for the 7th time, won the war that wasn't a war. So now the United States has to open the Strait of Hormuz that was already open before the not war began. The not war began because Iran had uranium that was totally, completely, beautifully obliterated. So they can build the nuclear bomb they weren't building, which is why the United States had to start the not war. It definitely didn't start. Now the United States, which has nuclear weapons, is threatening to use nuclear weapons to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are far too dangerous for countries with nuclear weapons to allow other countries to have. If the United States saw the United States doing what the United States does in other countries, the United States would invade the United States to liberate the United States from the tyranny of the United States. It is exactly what's happening. I mean, it's very well done. Now, this last part is actually a common sentiment. I've seen that going around for years, and it is accurate, and you all know it. You take a fraction of what this country does, this government does, And you put that on any one of their adversaries, and good God, they would have been breaking this down a long time ago. I just think that's well done. And I mean, this first part just does not even encapsulate how many times this cycle has gone. From the it's not a war to it's gone, now it's back, or to the idea that we're about to make a deal every week for the last, what? How long has it been? February 28th forward. As insane as this is, it's spot on. At least I said, at least in regard to the unparalleled stupidity of this ongoing agenda. Now, Ghalibaf, Speaker of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the parliament, he came out and said this today. They are neither committed, speaking of the U.S. government, they are neither committed to a ceasefire nor believe in dialogue. And by demonstrating through the naval blockade, which has never stopped, and even though it's not successful to a degree, and violation of agreements regarding Lebanon, both of which they've maintained, that they only understand the language of power. He says the naval blockade against the Iranian nation and Americans' green light today to the Zionist regime turn America and regime bases and assets in the region to legitimate targets. They do, under international law. The hand of our armed forces is open, as always. So what this needs to show you yet again, like I said, if you go back to the last conversation we had, where in that moment I was saying, who knows, maybe today they're suddenly saying, okay, fine, we'll acquiesce, maybe there's something happening. But now you can look back, like I said, to the 4th and say, okay, well, now we can clearly see that Iran is maintained. They said no. They say these are the only things we want and we're not budging. Same thing I said the week before, same thing I said the week before that, same thing I said all the way back to April, which is when after they murdered Khomeini and after they bombed their negotiations more than once, they said, we're done. We are not doing this anymore. Now they accepted mediations through Pakistan, and they at least once got tricked by Trump into meeting in Islamabad, not them, but somebody else, where they said we would give them everything, and they did not. And you know how we know that? Because Iran went and said, this is what we're still asking for, and you didn't give it, so now we're done. And it kept happening. And since then, they've had numerous times where Trump said, we're so close, we're almost there. We're going to kill you, though, but we're almost there. And then you can see that Iran said, we're only asking for these things. And if we don't get them, we're not doing anything. And over and over and over, that's happened. Like, I'm really trying to stress how consistent it's been outside from Iran's perspective. And what it is, they want to control the strait. They want to manage the toll dynamic. They want Trump and them to give them billions of dollars for what they've caused. And I think the other one was, I don't even think the nuclear part is even on the table anymore until after 30 days beyond those parts. That's the last time I checked with their agreement, but even these might be up in the air between what they're discussing, right? But those are the last things I can verify. And every single time it comes to this point where Ghalibaf is now saying they are not committed to it and we can prove it because of why, and you heard this from me since April, the blockade and Lebanon, because that's what they've always said. And if you listen to corporate media, you would be missing what Iran has consistently said and consistently maintained and publicly stood by. That's how stupid this is. Because what do you get? Even the adversarial media come out and say, Trump said we're close to a deal. And here's Iran right there going, that's not true. That's not real. Who said that? And why don't the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox News go, but here's what Iran says while they report that? I think you already know, because there's something broken in all of this. And Israel clearly has influence over it. So the Hormuz letter, which I'm not very, there's the other one, the Kubisi letter, which I've seen for a while. This one was somewhat new. I've seen them put out things I know are false, but nonetheless, this does appear to be somewhat accurate because it's what happened afterward. This is from today. It says Iran's Revolutionary Guard is now ready to execute what they claim is Operation True Promise 5 against Israel tonight, with Supreme Leader Khomeini having authorized a full-scale resumption of the war and Iran's Supreme National Security Council convening as an emergency session, saying a painful and decisive response will come in response to the Beirut strikes. Again, in Lebanon, which is part of the Iran discussion, like it always has been, and they've been bombing, imagine like they're bombing downtown New York City. That's what we're talking about with Beirut, Tehran. They're bombing densely populated civilian areas. You can't hide that. There is no narrative for it. So this came out this morning, and here we are. This is at least according to Israel, which let me know in the chat if you've seen anything new develop. It says, according to Ynet News, Netanyahu told Trump they were preparing a massive response to Iran. So, yeah, this is in the chat. I can't confirm that. Metal Mama Sue, I doubt, would say that if she didn't see the report. So, overall, the point is that it seems they're saying that they're going to respond. That's probably already happening. But let's understand before we even read this. The only reason this is still happening is because the United States and Israel refuse to back away from this. They've continued, and everything about this is illegal. The war was started in a legal sense. There was no imminent threat. There is no legal justification for the ongoing war. They continue to violate their own agreements with the ceasefire. The blockade, Lebanon, Trump agreed to both. They still do them. That shows me that it's a desire from somebody, I argue largely Israel, to keep this going no matter what. The last discussion, it was about to happen, and then Netanyahu stopped and said, we're bombing anyway, and that blew it all up. No pun intended. So now if they respond and keep this going, well, whose fault is that, guys? It's certainly not Iran's. And every part of this, they've continued to show engagement and restraint. And what do they get? Bombed while they're negotiating. And this is not about good guy, bad guy. These are just facts. I argue that every one of these governments are irresponsible and dangerous, and I don't trust any of them. Israel says Iran launched missiles at it in the first such bombardment. Literally, it says during the fragile ceasefire. Associated Press, how embarrassing. I mean, what a stupid thing to say. Here's what's funny. You might have just seen this on Reuters where they came out and said something about the West Bank. I almost had a point about it, and then I'm mad I didn't because they even corrected it. But ultimately, Reuters came out and said that there are settlements in the West Bank that some see as illegal. And this is what I've always been highlighting. It's not some see as illegal. It is illegal based on every single standing of the international law dynamic, even U.S. law. They're illegal, period. Now, you can argue that Trump doesn't care, but so when they reported that, they got so much pushback, Reuters deleted the tweet and reposted it saying, we apologize, saying this is illegal international law. And I was like, wow, I've never seen that before. I just found it to be very important. And so now I'm going to forget what I was going with that. I did. What was that? Oh, well, anyway, the interesting part about that was that ultimately we saw them, they were forced to admit that the way they were, that's what it was, the fragile ceasefire, is the idea that they've said that it's, that people argue. And that's editorializing something that's undeniable. That's like saying, taking something we know as fact and saying that it's disputed when it's not, right? And so in this case, saying during fragile ceasefire, nobody is confused about the fact that there's not an ongoing ceasefire. Trump pretending like it means different things in the Middle East, that's just stupid, guys. That's only an excuse to give people who already know they're wrong the leeway to pretend they think they're not. It's simple, and that's a dishonest dynamic. So for AP to frame it like that is just they're playing the game. Simple. Because it's not a ceasefire if they're bombing. And Iran has argued since April it hasn't existed, that they're still trying to maintain, but ultimately that they've been violating it ever since then. And so when they bomb them and they bomb back, there is nothing to be violated, guys. But ultimately, it's an illegal war from step one, so they're violating anything when they attack. Israel says Iran has launched missiles in its first such bombardment since the fragile ceasefire took place in April, complicating mediation efforts for a deal. How stupid. Now, the rest of it's up in the air because the rest of it's pretty much just what it was happening as we started. So the rest of it's whatever they might add to it. But where we're at, Iran has now initiated bombings of Israel. I want to reiterate, ask yourself with all that's happening, why Iran has not bombed the United States. Thank God. And I kind of doubt they will unless driven to an extreme position. Reason I'm saying that is there's no legal reason for them not to have done that. And I find that to be such an important point to stress, again, which you keep telling us, government, that this is a radical Muslim mania. They just want to hurt us because they hate our freedom. And then you bomb them and give them a legal opening to do what you claim they've always wanted, and they still don't. They still show restraint. You could argue that's not because they're good, bad, or just simply that they recognize it's in their interest to not do that. Self-interest is what it always comes down to. But it still shows you they're not the belligerent, maniacal entity that you want to frame them as. It's just not. And still to this day, you just bombed them and they still have not. They're responding to U.S. bases around the world. And now they're bombing Israel. I just think you need to digest that as an American and understand what that shows you. And if they were to bomb the United States, that would be legally within their rights as an engaged warfare because they're bombing into Iran. And I hope to God it doesn't happen, because not only would that be devastating, it would be used by this government to initiate more war. And you damn well know it, even though it all stems back to their illegal actions. So now here we are, where they've initiated this, not because they're the irrational one lashing out, committing terrorist acts, which is how they're already framing it, but because they're simply been pushed into this position, even though they've been to the table since the very beginning. And on the 28th, they were offering to give up their nuclear program, to give up their enrichment, and Israel bombed them on the 28th. Then they were actually willing to negotiate for some kind of going back to normalcy, and they bombed them into mediation. Then they murdered Khamenei. And I believe even after that, they had one more attempt and they were trying to bomb. They said, we're done. Why would anybody maintain that? There was another example from Islamabad where they were actually, and I think that's what they were trying to do. When Trump tried to pretend to offer them everything and they met with somebody, there were reports they were trying to take the plane down when they went home. That's what I think that was all really about. Now, President Trump says he's going to call Prime Minister Netanyahu and tell him not to strike back Iran, per Axios. So I'm pretty sure we can assume that's false. I mean, I'm not even joking at this point. Axios has put out so many consistently false stories. At this point, it's in your interest to go probably false, but we're still going to check. That's just looking at your track record, But let me know if you've seen bombings now. That would be relevant, right? Trump says, I'm going to tell him not to, and they bomb anyway. Well, nothing new there. So I guess we'll find out. Now, I will include the actual concurrent. This is the HCON Res 86. That's the concurrent resolution about the War Powers Act. All it really says, Congress directs Donald Trump, the president, to remove forces in hostilities against Iran. Simple. And it's a concurrent resolution, which means that he can't veto it. But arguably, I already claimed he's going to ignore it. Mark my words. He's going to argue that it's not legally binding, which technically it's not, but it is not the idea. It's never been enforced in the sense that it should be legally bound. It is Congress enforcing its right. And we used to live in a world where executive branch acknowledged that, or they'd be impeached. But guess what? Congress won't impeach him. I mean, if he ignores this, if it passes the Senate, which I argue it probably will, or the other dynamic is this will simply stall in the Senate. So the War Powers Resolution should have been done a long time ago, but it got pushed back on. I think this is about Congress pretending they care. Because right now it's sitting in the Senate and there's not even something on the docket for it to happen. Then we have to wait. Meanwhile, they're still bombing each other. Remember that both Democrats and Republicans support this. You know how I even have Democrats coming out and saying, now that we got there, or now that we're there and we're in the war, we have to get the uranium. We can't just go home after we lost 13 Americans. That's a Democrat and a Republican telling you that. So they're using the death of Americans that they caused and swore wouldn't happen to justify why they need to keep going. Same old, guys, left and right. AIPAC funded Democrat, AIPAC funded Republicans. Now, in regard to Lebanon, as Dave DeCamp says, but I thought Trump said bad words to Netanyahu about this. Today, as we keep telling you, they never stopped. Netanyahu attacks Beirut. It doesn't stop. There is no, Netanyahu does what he wants. I think we know why. Here's Gaza. Two men in a photo were identified as Haj Nadi Maruf and Haj Ali Maruf. Both were arrested by Israel from their homes in Bet Lahaina, in Gaza. After being used as human shields, their relatives found them 3 days later, executed. Here they are, being marched in here as human shields, naked. No big deal, though, right? This is a Wednesday in occupied Palestine. I'm being probably inappropriately facetious, guys. It's insane what they're dealing with. These people are being used and kidnapped and tortured and starved. And it's, didn't you hear? Rubin told you it was over. It's not even happening anymore. Because I guess all they care about is the IDF members who were taken in combat and then not treated poorly and returned. And now it's over. Who cares about all the Palestinians that are still being tortured in Israeli prisons? Who cares about the occupation of Gaza and people that are being starved and bombed and think about the kind of horrible person it takes or the stupidity it takes to be a Dave Rubin and pretend like that's not happening. Like that. Right? Here, Israel Exposed put this out. This is everywhere. I mean, this you can find translations. You can find the original interview is out there. It's a montage of Israeli soldiers talking about murdering children for 5 straight minutes. This guy was openly talking about how he killed innocent people. He enjoyed doing it. I mean, these are IDF members on the record telling you this, and this is not even unique. It's so many of them out there. It's insane. And as Blakely says, every media outlet and politician in the West, when you show them Israel admitting to their own war crimes. Every single day. On that note, heartbreaking farewell moments as Fad Abu Haikal carries the body of his infant son, Sam, who was killed on the 5th in the city of Hebron, as relatives and family members bid him sorrowful farewell. And Barry says, how is this not headline news all around the world? Why aren't these images everywhere? Imagine if this was an Israeli baby. Now, they chalk this up to a resistant person. They literally discuss this, Israeli reports, as somebody resisting something, and they're talking about a child that they killed. This was a very wide story, guys. But what you're not going to hear is this covered by any of the corporate media. I don't even need to explain why. It's the same story every single day. Lastly, talking about the West Bank, which doesn't ever stop. Here, this person in Hebrew wrote, it's translated from Hebrew. So don't forget that Hebrew, the translation for Jews and Zionism, is the same thing. At least that's how this has been used over the years for a long time. So the same thing when you come to the Palestinian discussion, going back a long way, because of the way Israel's always framed it as the same thing. When you come to the old contrast, the Jews and Zionism were framed the same way. So arguably they were talking about the Zionist elements as opposed to Jews at that point, or the combination of the two, and they always framed that as being them hating Jews. That's why today Hamas and others very clearly outline that their battle is with Zionism. Plenty of Jewish people support their right to determination. A lot of them live in Israel, by the way. Orthodox Jews that stand up for them every day. Yes, it's a minority, but it does exist. The point is, it's in Hebrew, so you can read that for Jews or Zionists. My point is, West settlers, the illegal settlers, the whole world knows is illegal, entering into the West Bank to steal territory. Here's what they look like. This person says, this is what settlers look like when they enter a Palestinian village to execute a pogrom. This was in Huwara today. 9 Palestinians were injured. Not one was arrested. Almost always they come with the support of the IDF. I simply said, well, that sure looks familiar. What does that look like? Don't we see this all the time, but we're framed as something else? This same old, I mean, you could fill in the blank with what you like, guys. That is not what the good guys look like. That is not what everything we've always seen over the years as the ISIS, the terrorist, it's always just like that. Maybe you should remember where this all comes from, right? The idea of where this stuff actually stems back to. I think I actually have, right there.
I mean, certainly the Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 1920s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is, in fact, an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
Yep, that's pretty easy to see. I mean, don't just take his word for it. Do your own research. Understand how easy it is to recognize where that all stems from, what the timing correlates with. And it's just, you go any number of examples to go back to false flag discussions or things we've seen play out in this country. These tactics are exactly the same, guys. And it's not to say that anybody anywhere. That's my point as always. Extremism exists in every possible category. And it was to stop a Muslim organization from utilizing Israeli Zionists to carry out some attack so they can blame it on Israel, or vice versa. Israelis using Palestinians to make it look. That happens every single day, guys. So the point is to show discernment, question everything, but use the facts to back up your, to guide your research. And what you're going to find is just an undeniable long track record of exactly this element doing exactly what we're seeing today. And it's all playing out in front of us. You now have our own media telling you, look, they're spying on you. Look, our own government says they're the highest level of threat. And we're supposed to brush that off because Trump's team goes, that's not true. You mean aside from the DIA, you mean aside from Gabbard being pushed out of the position where that report came from? Guys, the whole country sees this now. So as always, I'm hoping people can recognize that's not left or right. Don't let this information guide you to think the Democrats or the Republicans. Let it guide you to recognize that your government is the problem. Or however you want to look at it, that the government is the core point, and that it's not about one side or the other. And that if we want to solve or fix the government, it has to be treated as a whole problem. I'm hoping we can see beyond it entirely, but either way, it can't be treated as half of it because you're never going to solve it. And I think that's what they're trying to keep us. They're going to keep us trapped in this false left-right paradigm so we never actually solve or even try to solve the whole problem at once, which means it'll never actually stop. That's the whole point. So thank you for tuning in. Please get this information in front of people that need to see it. As always, we put this out because we believe in it, and this is something that is valuable. So you let us know what you think the value is worth. All right? We put this out because it means something. Let us know what you think it's worth. If you think it's 0, then put 0. I'm okay with that. As long as you share the content, talk about it, digest it, and disagree, that's okay. But if you think this work is valuable and it's worth something to you, then let us know what it is, because that's how we keep going. That's how this platform exists, because this is something that we put out for that purpose. You know, the main idea is that we want people to be able to understand this and learn and share. But if we don't have the support, it won't continue. So help us continue and share this stuff, guys. Make the clips, tag me, get it out there. I need people to continue to talk about these things. I know we've made a difference. And I mean, like, we, as all of us, you in this chat, everyone in the IMA, we've made a difference, guys. Right to this very point, we have made a difference. That's a win. If we give up today and go live into the woods, we have success. That's really important. But I'm only saying that so we recognize that it's not all insurmountable. You know, everything's fail. Like, that's what they want you to feel like, is that everything's always too hard and there's too powerful and there's too much happening. That's a design. Even if it's the truth, we should be fighting, because I'm telling you, we have been succeeding. The reason we're even having this conversation is because you guys are succeeding. So keep fighting. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Who did they buy it from, or think they were buying it from?
We have an incredible array of possibilities of creating foreign companies that have no way being traced back to Israel, shell companies over shell companies who affect the supply chain to our favor. We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors. The world is our stage.
Did you see any surprises in Gaza?
Surprises?
Yeah.
You mean intelligence surprises?
Pages, walkie-talkies. Do you know how many treated equipment do we have in these countries? You don't. I do.
You mean booby-trapped equipment?
Not only booby-trapped.
And spying.
Manipulated equipment. All right?
In which countries are you talking about?
All the countries that you can imagine.